Welcome to the Fantasy Audiobook. The Flash from My Hero Academia. Chapter 61. Kyoto, the entrance of a somewhat remote alley. Bakugo, be careful later, this, villains, is very dangerous. Li Tian said with a serious face. Dangerous? Bakugo was taken aback, looking at the serious Li Tian. She felt strange in her heart, she had never seen Li Tian so serious before. Time back to half an hour ago. Li Tian and Bakugo, who were taking different courses at the Best Jeanist Heroes firm, but they were both babbled, suddenly heard the telephone ringing on the dedicated line between the firm and the police. It stands to reason that this kind of thing is not surprising. After all, as a very popular heroes firm, the hotline dedicated to the police will ring once, two or three times in almost every 3 days, but the key is here. Just after Heroes, an assistant from Best Jeanist office, answered the phone. His expression changed instantly after hearing what the police said on the phone, and then, under the strange eyes of several people from Li Tian and Bakugo, after staying away from the two of them muttering together, unexpectedly. Li Tian and Bakugo were entrusted with the police task of capturing villains. Bakugo still vaguely remembers that the professional heroes who answered the phone at that time changed his face greatly when he heard the content, but it is not right. If it is really that kind of vicious villains, it is absolutely impossible to give it to us. Could it be that that guy is really dangerous but he doesn't know why it won't cause harm to us? Bakugo turned his head to look at the bouncing little loli in the alley with full of doubts. It was a fresh and delicious little loli who seemed to be only about 1.34 meters tall, wearing a blue and white Lolita-style cute loli outfit, with 2 golden ponytails tied behind her back. Bounced and shook. This doesn't look dangerous no matter what. Bakugo's mouth twitched. As if seeing Bakugo's intentions, Li Tian spoke seriously from the sidelines, and said, Bakugo, don't be careless. In this era of quirks, you should look at quirks more than age and appearance. Quirks. Makes sense. Bakugo's eyes were fixed, and he looked solemnly at the little loli who was bouncing around and humming a ditty in the alley. After 3 seconds, the corners of Bakugo's mouth still twitched uncontrollably. Could it be possible that in the future he will surpass All Might's No. 1 heroes Bakugo, and the first villains he faces will be a primary school student, and a primary school loli girl? What is this? Shame on you. Come on, Bakugo. If I come, the battle will be over in an instant, so I will hold the line and give you a chance to practice. Li Tian commanded with righteous words. Don't command me. Bakugo snorted coldly, but still walked towards the alley. He won't be polite to Li Tian about this kind of thing. They are followed by the assistant heroes of Best Jeanist Heroes firm, waiting to rate them according to their performance, work experience, even if he doesn't care much, but he definitely doesn't want to be a loser and be returned to Xiangyang. Stop the villains in front of me. Bakugo walked out in a fair manner, shouting 3 times. There was a clear and light hay sound, as clear and moving as big pearls and small pearls falling on a jade plate, and immature and cute. If the top quality lolicon is here, I'm afraid it will fall to the ground with weak legs in an instant, but it's a pity yes. The person who appeared in front of this cute voice is the extremely incomprehensible, Lord Blast. Give me a good hand and catch it, it's best not to resist. Bakugo walked towards little Lolita, with a grin, his dark back and bad lines, just like a perverted big bad wolf walking towards the poor little girl, sheep. However, it's really strange that there is a heroes who dares to face me in front of me. A childish and lovely voice sounded, saying, little Lolita, and turned to face Bakugo. At first glance, I thought it was an angel walking out of a fairy tale. However, Bakugo raised his brows, and moved his hands behind him with 2 big grenades. The shock wave of the explosion instantly pushed him to rush over, and then he directly pressed the little Lolita to the ground. As expected, you are very weak. Bakugo looked at the little loli indifferently and said. Being pushed down on the dirty ground, the clothes and face of little Lolita were stained with dust, but she showed no sign of fear. Because heroes cannot kill, even a villains, especially villains, like him who is powerless. Giggle, it looks like heroes, little big brother, you don't know me. Pushed to the ground, little loli giggled happily. Then, knowing you are. Before Bakugo could finish speaking, he froze with astonishment. My voice. The crisp voice came into Bakugo's ears, making her understand that it was not her auditory hallucination just now. Subconsciously, Bakugo let go of the hands holding little Loli, looked at his gloved hands in astonishment, and then touched his chest, which was soft and bouncy. Play, you big-headed ghost. Bakugo's handsome face became hideous, and he suddenly turned his head and glared in Li Tian's direction. Is she pretty after being a girl? Li Tian, who had entered Speed Force mode instantly, looked at Bakugo. Let's not talk about that, at least it is by visual inspection. The hair is still afro, but it is inexplicably softer than before, the edges and corners of the cheeks are also fused, and the skin is even more tender and smooth visible to the naked eye, with a slender waist and looks a lot taller. Typical skin white beauty, long legs. Bakugo, your mental quality is not good. Li Tian's voice sounded behind Bakugo. Looking back suddenly again, Bakugo glared at Li Tian, who was carrying the tortoise shell behind him. Oh no, the tied up little Lolita, his silver teeth were almost crushed. You tricked me again. Bakugo's voice was as clear as a nightingale, but there was undisguised anger. What do you mean by cheating you? This is to remind you that you must be careful of the sneak attacks of these cunning villains in the future. Even if you are facing such a cute loli, you must not relax. Li Tian shook his head in a majestic manner. The little loli in his hand showed it to Bakugo. Like you, I didn't get information about this villains from the firm's professional heroes, but why can I cheat? Oh no, I can remind you instead of you reminding me what? Li Tian said righteously. Bakugo, this is the retribution that you usually walk alone, never caring about news and gossip, and said seriously with a straight face. This, villains, is called Xuan Yin Wei Yang, which can be regarded as a very hot news on the internet this year. Among them, there is only one for her quirksagender conversion, and her revenge for other people in this society, but she launched a series of revenge because of the weird quirks one day, and the reasons have been reported in detail. Why don't you know? This is one of your biggest shortcomings. Although you are smart and careful, you are too arrogant. As a professional heroes, although it is inevitable to face some unknown villains of quirks, but for the known villains of quirks the villains doesn't understand, that's too much dereliction of duty. Li Tian's eyes were round, and he shouted menacingly. Li Tian, that's right, this is not revenge. Am I the kind of person who would have grievances because of the sports festival that has passed? Bakugo. Bakugo glared at Li Tian with angry flames in his eyes, clenched his silver teeth, and squeezed out a word from between his teeth. You fool, delete the photos in my hand first. Ahem, I'm sorry, it's easy. Li Tian coughed twice without changing his face, and put his mobile phone into his pocket without any embarrassment. As for deletion, why do you want to delete it? Why do you need to delete the photos you took with your hands? Besides, what did you ask him to delete? He didn't do anything. In one hand, she has already used quirks once, and her quirks must be converted from a girl to a boy, and then the boy can be changed to a girl, and then repeat this cycle in an infinite loop, so she cannot cast quirks now. Let's go, Bakugo-ji, cough cough, Bakugo King, you can contact the police and hand in the task. After finishing speaking, Li Tian turned around and turned into a bolt of lightning, and the speed force suddenly activated. Dodged Bakugo's angry pounce and appeared at the entrance of the alley. Let's go, Bakugo-ji, cough cough, Bakugo King, you can contact the police and hand in the task. After finishing speaking, Li Tian turned around and turned into a lightning bolt, and the speed force suddenly activated. Dodged Bakugo's angry pounce and appeared at the entrance of the alley. Oh, that's not right. What am I doing away from? Bakugo is a woman now. Isn't this the time for my grasping dragon claw hand, which I have practiced so hard for several years, to show its brilliance? At the entrance of the alley, Li Tian suddenly reacted, turning around and looking at the delicate-looking Bakugo-ji in the alley. I turned my head decisively and left. Sure enough, I'm still too kind. How can I do such a thing that takes advantage of others' danger and adds fuel to the fire when I treat my classmates? Li. Duplicity, Tian righteously criticized. I'm from duplicity. A genius is not that kind of scum. It's not because I didn't have the courage to use the catch, dragon claw hand stunt on Bakugo, the man of the past. How could he not even have that mere sesame-sized courage? Li Tian walked out of the alley with the burly, little Lolita, who was trapped on his shoulders. That back view, looks like a perverted dead house who abducts slowly. After a while, the police car sensed the place Li Tian had notified. As soon as he got out of the car, he saw Li Tian who was carrying the little loli who was tied turtle and armor. The policeman uncle almost didn't draw his gun and open fire. After all, this scene, no matter how you look at it, looks like a pervert kidnapping an underage girl. However, the reputation of Zhuanyinweiyang is still very big, and they all knew the goal of this mission, so they quickly reacted, and embarrassedly took over the Yinweiwei from Li Tian, who had a black line. Positive. After the police left, Bakugo, who was hiding in the alley, came out with a gloomy face, staring at Li Tian with a gloomy face. That terrifying aura fully confirmed that sentence, and the blackening was 3 times stronger. Ahem, don't worry, this ability will expire at around 3 a.m. tonight. Li said with a light cough. 3 o'clock, Bakugo-ji said with a gloomy face. Quirks, who turned yin back to yang, is gender switching. Since she was born, she will switch gender every 24 hours, that is, 1 day. At the same time, the ability exerted during the previous gender will automatically become invalid. This is the only one at present. The way to get in touch with this ability, as for why it is 3 o'clock, it may be because she was born at 3 o'clock. Li Tian explained. It's 3 o'clock in the morning, does that mean I have to maintain this posture for a whole day? The roar in Bakugo-ji's eyes almost swallowed his reason, but I don't know if it's a relationship with a girl, but Bakugo endured it. Came down and didn't break out. Okay, Quirks, which has turned yin back to yang, actually has a series of effects such as beauty, hair whitening, slowing down aging and restoring skin and hair elasticity. Everyone whose gender is reversed by her will be greatly improved after they return to their original state. This is why he used quirks illegally 8 or 9 times in a row, yet he has not been sent to prison, but instead came out again and again. Li Tian patted Bakugo's shoulder comfortingly. Okay. The skin is quite smooth and tender. Tokyo Airport. Mad Uncle. A girl threw herself into the shriveled All Might's arms, looking at All Might with tears in her eyes. Haha, long time no see. Little Melissa. All Might looked at the girl with a bright smile on her face. Mad Uncle, you really can't recover anymore? Melissa asked All Might with tears in her eyes. All Might is very ordinary. When he passed on One for All to Green Valley, he already had this awareness, and said with a light smile, well, my body can no longer support me to fight. Let's go. Let's get in the car first and then we can talk. All Might looked around and patted Melissa on the shoulder and said, looking at the people around who had noticed him. Melissa nodded and got up from All Might's arms, but the eyes that looked at All Might were already full of unresolved sadness. Get in the car. Dad is very worried about Mad Uncle. Melissa said in a low voice, if Dad wasn't allowed to go out at will on my island, I'm afraid Dad would have flown over the day before yesterday. David, he shouldn't be crying. All Might joked as he looked at the depressed Melissa. Crying. Melissa whispered, Dad, he cried a lot, and kept saying that he was 1 step late, and it would be great if he could be 1 step earlier. All Might was taken aback. Mad Uncle, come with me to my island. Dad and the others are already researching a treatment plan. 10 walks can cure Tate Uncle. Melissa looked at All Might and said seriously. No need, you told David that you don't need to study the treatment plan. I know the situation in front of me best. All Might shook his head. Doesn't he know that other people don't know? The so-called body can no longer support him to fight is just an excuse. Although his body is seriously injured, it can still support him to fight for half an hour or even an hour. The reason why he can't fight is when he was fighting All for One own Forl's power is exhausted. Mad Uncle. Melissa looked at All Might beggingly. Ahem. Facing Melissa's gaze, All Might couldn't help coughing twice. That's good, I'm a teacher at Shangying High School now, and this semester will end in about 1.5 months until summer vacation. Summer vacation, I will go to my island to find you during the summer vacation. Melissa's eyes lit up immediately, and she nodded repeatedly. Mad Uncle, is this where you live now? It's much worse than before. Melissa asked casually as she looked around All Might in Shangying's bachelor apartment curiously. Haha, this is my special request, it will be inconvenient to live in if it is too big. All Might came out from the kitchen with tea. All come, Mad Uncle. Melissa hurried forward to take the tea tray. All Might didn't have the politeness to ask Melissa to pick it up and start pouring tea. Melissa, you came here this time not only because of my injury. My island, even if you are just a trainee researcher, if you want to apply to leave the island, it will take half a month for approval. All Might asked curiously. My island, as the most technologically advanced place in the world with the most scientists, is extremely strict in terms of entry and exit. The same is true for tourists visiting the island, and the same is true for the researchers on the island. This is to protect my island, to protect scientists and researchers. For safety, what is more important is the huge scientific research data and advanced scientific research results in my island. This. Melissa was taken aback, and a look of embarrassment suddenly appeared on her face. Matt Uncle didn't tell me that. I almost forgot. The original purpose of my visit to Neon this time was actually for the 15-year-old boy who awakened quirks that Matt Uncle mentioned last time. Melissa said embarrassingly, scratching his head and laughing, because I searched my island's information for a long time last time, but couldn't find any cases, so I was curious and wanted to come over and observe. Find young Li Tian. All Might nodded knowingly. As David's friend, he was very aware of the obsessions these scientists have for certain things. It's not impossible for Melissa to come over because of any of his calls. Is his name Li Tian? Where is he now? Melissa asked extremely. Unfortunately, these 2 days are the professional experience of Hero High School. Li Tian has already gone to the professional hero's office for internship. All Might shook his head and said, I went to the office. Melissa's face collapsed, her eyebrows frowned slightly. Matt Uncle, when will that professional experience end? To end, it will take 7 days, and today is the first day. All Might said without thinking. As a teacher, he still knows the middle of these activities. Is over, I only have 5 days of vacation, and I have to fly back. I can only stay here for 4 days at the most. Melissa raised her head with a look of discouragement, and Melissa was watery. His big eyes stared at All Might. Melissa, just tell me what you have. Matt Uncle will definitely help you with all your strength. All Might said with a twitch in the corner of his mouth. Which Matt Uncle will take me to? Li Tian's Youth Workplace Experience Hero's office, okay. Melissa stared pitifully at All Might with her big watery eyes. I knew it, All Might said helplessly, before answering. Yeah, thank you Matt Uncle. Melissa jumped up excitedly. All Might was speechless, looking at Melissa who was sad because of him just now and now happy because of a trivial matter, couldn't help but feel helpless. A woman's heart is a needle in the bottom of the sea, the ancients did not deceive me. Haha, how could you idiot heroes catch up to me, obediently follow me and eat farts? On the streets of Kyoto, a heavy locomotive passed quickly on the road. The most astonishing thing is that there is no driver on the heavy locomotive that is so fast, but the locomotive itself is in a fast form, but the sound of the locomotive is undoubtedly the voice of a male human being. And in the back, the few heroes who can wander between the buildings or fly in the sky in the distance have extremely ugly faces. But the speed of the locomotive shuttling through the traffic was at least 160 to 70 kilometers, and it kept disrupting the traffic order. The moving vehicles were either forced to stop or forced to change lanes. The order instantly became chaotic, and even several driving cars lost control and turned over on the spot. Fortunately, several professional heroes who were tracking the locomotive not far away shot one after another, and did not cause too many casualties. Body and machine, villains, quirks, body integrated machine, can be integrated with any machine, incarnate the machine to manipulate freely, can perfect the power of the machine, of course, the things that the machine can't do, after the body melted machine, he still can't do it. But now, with his body integrated into the gear of the motorcycle, if he wasn't on such a busy street, fearing that the car would crash and kill people, his speed could easily reach more than 300 to 400 kilometers. And this is also the reason why those professional heroes have ugly faces. In this kind of place, they can't chase, they can't catch up, but they fight, but they don't dare to shoot rashly, and once they run into an open place with a body and a weapon, they can only follow behind at full speed. Eat ass. Haha, you bunch of useless heroes, you are only worthy of eating my exhaust. The heavy locomotive burst out with self-satisfied laughter and mocking sounds, and at the same time, accompanied by a deafening there was a sound, and a thick black smoke spewed out from the rear of the car, filling the air. At this time, whoosh, on the side of the pervasive black smoke, a golden light that is hard to see with the naked eye disappeared in an instant. In the golden light, Li Tian's galloping figure passed by the side of the exhaust gas, and instantly caught up with the speeding heavy locomotive, driving side by side. Li Tian glanced at the locomotive beside him, a strange look flashed in his eyes. This locomotive is too exaggerated, the length of the two-wheeled heavy locomotive is not inferior to that of an ordinary private car, and its height is also comparable to the height of ordinary people. The huge engine looks like the heart of a monster, roaring. However, the speed of this locomotive may be astonishingly fast in the eyes of others, but in Li Tian's eyes, the speed of this locomotive is no more than a baby's toddling speed, too slow, too slow. Li Tian took out the wrench that he had prepared earlier from behind, hooked the corner of his mouth, and then quickly knocked on the shell of the locomotive. It's not that he doesn't want to unload the motorcycle handsomely, it's because he couldn't find any place to start with this motorcycle. Who can teach him that this kind of car should be unloaded from that screw? Fortunately, the wrench was not in vain. Li Tian looked at the heavy locomotive that had been knocked out by him 2 or 3 times, with a smile on his face. The embankment of 1,000 miles was destroyed by an ant nest, and a gap appeared, and the next step was even simpler. Under the package of super speed force, Li Tian moved his hands quickly, and one after another the motorcycle parts were smashed by Li Tian. Ahem, they were dismantled and thrown into the sky. Anyway, in the state of speed force, those parts thrown out casually are almost the same as standing still for Li Tian. In less than a second or two after Li Tian caught up with the motorcycle, the monster-like heavy motorcycle was torn apart by Li Tian and turned into a skyscraper of parts. When the group of professional heroes who were chasing after their bodies and guns arrived, what they saw was Li, who was chatting with the onlookers on the side of the road and looking at how to put a bunch of parts back together. Oh no, it's the Flash, with an unspeakable body and weapon tied up. Forehead. A group of professional heroes looked at the ropes tied to the body and the weapon, and the corners of their mouths twitched in silence. They looked at Li Tian with strange eyes. Seniors, it shouldn't matter if this locomotive is dismantled like this, Li Tian said innocently, pointing at a pile of parts beside him. It's okay, Flash, this guy's quirks, unless he wants to. If you don't dismantle his fusion, then he won't come out at all. A female professional heroes said to Li Tian explain. Different from the unknown, at the beginning, the current Li Tian, in the circle of professional heroes in Kyoto, can be regarded as a little famous. At least it won't be seen as a student. Li Tian also has an impression of this person. Just now the other party was running and chasing the body and weapons on the tall buildings behind. Of course, it's different from Li Tian's running that ignores gravity. Every 10 or 20 steps Rikido is about to run out, he kicks and jumps to the opposite tall building to run again. Repeatedly, Li Tian couldn't help but click his tongue when he saw that kind of jumping ability. If he could have that kind of jumping ability, he would definitely have a big increase in driving in places like cities or forests, and even his own speed would be improved. Promote. That's good. Li Tian heaved a sigh of relief. This heavy motorcycle looked super expensive at first glance, and he couldn't afford to pay for it dismantled like this. After conciliating a few words with a group of professional heroes, Li Tian turned and left. And everyone looked at Li Tian's leaving back. Ah no, it was Li Tian's disappearing figure in an instant. There was a touch of emotion in his eyes. A new generation replaces the old one. Those old, professional heroes who have debuted for 2 or 3 years will be suppressed by newcomers. And after Li Tian left, in the alley not far away, 2 figures, a man and a woman, walked over one after the other. Mad Uncle, that's him, Melissa said, looking at the direction Li Tian was leaving with her eyes sparkling. That's right, that's Li Tian boy. All Might, who was tightly wrapped and covered his face, nodded, with a smile on his face. Although the power is gone, his eyesight is still there. The speed that Li Tian erupted just now cannot be seen accurately, but it definitely far exceeds the speed that Li Tian showed during the Battle of Shenyang. Obviously, in this short period of time, in just a few days, Li Tian made great progress. Li Tian called his quirk speed force, which is an all-round speed increase that can be freely manipulated by his own will. I estimate that the speed he just exploded has exceeded 1,000 meters per second. All Might explained. Road. 1 kilometer per second. Melissa's little mouth opened into an O shape, very cute. It's unscientific. It's 1000 meters per second, but he just ran silently and didn't move at all. Melissa exclaimed. As a scientist, even with the word backup, he understands how terrifying it is for a person to run at a speed of 1000 meters per second. The gust of wind caused by running alone is enough to create a devastating storm. If you turn to running, it couldn't be easier to create a super tornado. Haha, I'm not sure about this, but Li Tian should be able to control the damage he causes. All Might said with a smile and shook his head. Then I'll go and ask him in person. Melissa said with curiosity on her face. Let's go, Mad Uncle, let's go find him. Don't worry, Li Tian and I have already made an appointment. We will meet tonight. During the day, he still needs to participate in the workplace experience. All Might said with a smile. Okay then. Although Melissa was a little discouraged, she didn't feel dissatisfied, and she smiled again when she turned her head. I haven't been here in Kyoto yet. Uncle Matt, take me around for a while. Let's go shopping. Haha, speaking of it, I haven't done a good shopping here in Kyoto for so many years. I can get my wish today. All Might scratched his head and smiled. Hey, a smile suddenly appeared on Melissa's face. Then let's go. On the other hand, Li Tian obviously didn't notice that All Might, who had made an appointment with him, would arrive early, and he brought a beautiful girl with him. The third one, unfortunately, I haven't met any villains suitable for hand-to-hand training. In the Speed Force, Li Tian galloped leisurely, his eyes casually scanning the still world around him. Although he didn't even get a temporary license, it's against the regulations to do anything to villains, but after obtaining the professional hero's license, he can patrol the vicinity and decide to save people or take them according to the situation. Next, villains. It's a pity that Li Tian has no salary yet. But, soon, I will have money soon. Li Tian suddenly thought of something, and then there was a smile in his eyes. After years of unremitting investigation, Li Tian finally determined that in this world 100 years ago, there were no comics similar to his previous life. Should I copy first? No, should I draw DC first? Or should I draw Marvel first? Or find a Japanese manga to try out? Or, draw them all? Li Tian grinned, imagining himself the scene of making money every day. When the young master has money, the first thing to do is to buy a laboratory. This may not be affordable, forget it, rent a laboratory, rent a few scientists, give me enough to fill my stomach. I invented that energy bar, and after eating so much food every day, I'm almost anorexic. Li Tian rubbed his stomach with a bitter expression on his face. A remote mountain forest area. Hiss, hiss, hiss. A group of purple-black mist appeared out of thin air, forming a small vortex, and 5 figures rushed out of the vortex in a panic. One of them staggered and fell to the ground, and then the vortex quickly dissipated. The moment it dissipated, there was loud shouting and rolling mud and rocks from the other end of the vortex. The sound of the rolling mud rocks shook the world, but the instant the fog dissipated, only a large group of mud rocks poured in, and then everything subsided. 5 bewildered figures, together with Kurogiri, who appeared in a condensed form in an instant when the purple-black mist dissipated. A total of 6 people were all buried in the rolling mud and stones in disgrace. What the hell is going on? Sigangmu roared in a low voice. At this moment, only the big hand covering his face was left, and the gap between the hand molds on his face could be clearly seen. An incomparably ferocious face. It's not easy, you are being followed. A figure stood up in the mud and rocks beside Sigangmu. It looked like an ordinary face of passers-by. Mimi looked like she was smiling, and she didn't look like a villain's at all. But when he opened his mouth to speak and opened his eyes, a pair of ferocious upside-down triangular eyes were full of ferocious murderous intent, and the other 2 also got up from the mud and stood behind him, staring fiercely at the 3 of them, saying something hands-on gesture. The base they had prepared for 10 years was destroyed like this. How could they not be very happy? Impossible. After I rescued Shigaraki and Kurogiri at the very beginning, we used Kurogiri's teleportation quirks to hurry, and no one could track the teleportation. Another strong man with a hideous face and a tall stature, he shouted in a low voice. This person is the old subordinate of All for One who saved both Nikugaraki and Kurogiri when All for One attracted points of attention. But that's the truth. Our base has been established for more than 10 years and has never been discovered, but The pair of triangular eyes showed an angry killing intent, just 3 days after you arrived, was found to have destroyed. Moreover, it will take at least 2 days to quietly gather the power to destroy our base. Do you think I have enough reason to doubt this? The tall and strong man opened his mouth, speechless. In his heart, there was also unavoidable doubt, and he looked at Shikuragi and Kurogiri. Shigongmu also stopped his mania at this time, and fell into deep thought. Of course, compared to tracking, I think it is more likely that the opponent has some peculiar quirks that can lock your position. Triangle-eyed suddenly changed the subject, and said, however, I think the specifics and reasons should be up to you. It is a small test to be judged by the air recognized by the adults. Otherwise. Following the words of the triangular eyes, there was a half-smile expression on the other party's face. Smiling tiger, you want to betray your lord. The strong man was stunned, and looked at the hanging triangle eyes angrily. It's too ugly to say betrayal, it's just that my lord is in a mess right now. As for the heir he chooses, I, as a subordinate, want to see if the young master can lead us to rescue my lord. Triangular chuckled lightly. With a pair of destructive temperament his eyes were closed again, with a kind look on his face. You. The brawny man wanted to say something, but was stopped by Shigeoki raised his hand Bida. From the gap of that big hand, Shigeoki looked at the person in front of him coldly. He has a kind smile on his face, and there is no surprise on his face. He is not stupid. As early as 3 days ago, when he came to this base, he had already foreseen this scene. Even if the attack did not happen this time, the other party would probably find a reason to test him and want to take him back. These lawless, old divisions of teachers, that's such an easy thing to do. The time when All for One was arrested this time brought him a huge blow, and what he replaced, the growth after the blow was also huge. Thinking about it carefully, the previous battle between Shen and Yi was very inexplicable. He was attacked for no reason, his teacher was also attacked, and even the doctor was attacked. Let's not mention the location of his teacher, you know, the doctor's residence, but even he doesn't know. But there's one person who knows all 3 locations, and has even been there more than once. That is, Tamura. Shigaraki's eyes flicked to Kurogiri. It's this little thing. Shigaraki looked at the cleverly disguised tracker in his palm, and his cheeks twitched uncontrollably because of anger. It's such an inconspicuous little thing that caused all this. Black mist, black mist, black mist, you really deserve to die. Nigaragi turned his head fiercely and glared at the trembling Kurogiri. The tracker in his hand instantly collapsed and shattered. A terrifying malice that seemed to destroy everything burst out, and Nigaragi's face was covered with white gloves. The big hand of the hand model turned into a burst of black debris and fell to the ground without a sound. Under the feet of everyone, the mountains, rocks, grass, and trees are rapidly withering and collapsing under the malice at this moment. The vegetation is withering, and the rocks are crumbling and smashing, as if the end of the world is coming. Heiwu looked at Shigengmu in horror. His eyes were full of disbelief, and he was completely speechless under this malicious attack. His gut told him, move, you will be smashed to pieces in an instant. Let alone Kurogiri, who was being targeted. Even the other 4 people on the side facing Tamura Shigaraki at this time were shrouded in the crisis of death, as if they were facing a ferocious hunting beast with bare hands. The strong man looked at Shigengmu in horror, but suddenly he couldn't help being excited. There are successors, and his master has successors. Okay, so strong. Smiling Tiger couldn't help but took 2 steps back, wanting to subconsciously want to stay away from Shigengmu at this time, and the pair of triangular eyes that opened again to look at Shigengmu no longer had the sinister viciousness before spicy and hidden deep ambition, replaced by only the fear that has not melted for thousands of years. This malice made him couldn't help but recall All for One, and the doomsday scene before him also made him couldn't help but recall All for One. The eyes of the other 2 people looking at Shigeoki also lacked the previous banter, replaced by fear and respect. This scene of malice and destruction lasted for a full minute. Never mind. With the sudden opening of the dead handle tree, everything around him suddenly dissipated, and the previous malice that seemed to be approaching the end quietly dissipated. If it weren't for the withered flowers and plants around, the collapsed rocks were silently telling everything that happened just now. If it weren't for the fear on their faces, it would not have dissipated. I'm afraid they will all think that what happened before was just an illusion. Since the matter has already happened, there is no point in pursuing it. Kurogiri's ability will be very useful for the next plan. His life will be left behind in the plan to destroy society. Without looking at Kurogiri, he said indifferently. Yes. Kurogiri trembled when he saw the indifferent eyes of Nigaragi, and indeed he responded happily. As for this thing, Shigongmu looked at the black embers on the ground, a look of coldness flashed in his eyes. I probably know when and who made it. Who is it? Kurogiri asked subconsciously. This thing made him miserable, so he naturally hated it. We appeared in front of the heroes only once, and that time, who else could quietly put this kind of thing in your neck gaiter? Dead Kuraki said coldly, looking. There was a murderous look in Kurogiri's eyes. Although Kurogiri's ability is still useful and cannot be killed, it does not mean that this matter can pass easily. With a glance at Shigaraki, Kurogiri suddenly trembled and lowered his head involuntarily. He had already remembered that the only time they appeared in front of heroes was heroes. And that time, the only thing that could put something in his neck guard. Kurogiri thought of the kid who held his neck brace and almost took him down, and there was a look of disbelief in his eyes. In addition to being shocked, Kurogiri, who was extremely resentful towards Li Tian, also felt a touch of panic, just made that judgment in an instant, and left behind the tracking device, which is unbelievable. However, other than this possibility, Kurogiri really couldn't think of how his neck guard would leave something like a tracker. That person is definitely the enemy of the future. Kurogiri understood instantly, looked at Shigaraki, and wanted to speak. However, let's go. The teacher should have arranged a lot of things, said Shizuoki, turned around and prepared to leave, without even looking at Kurogiri. Yes, young master. The burly man quickly followed up, looking at the back of Shigenmu. His eyes were full of fanaticism. Smiling Tiger and the other two followed silently. Only Kurogiri, after seeing the attitude of Shigaraki, silently closed his mouth, and the resentment towards Li Tian in his heart suddenly became stronger by 3 points, and then hurriedly followed. Although Kurogiri knew about the matter, he didn't know the coordinates of the location, so he couldn't use teleportation. In the front of everyone, Shigongmu's face was far less calm than the others imagined, and the almost distorted expression was full of hatred. It's not going to end like this, that brat. Sorry, I didn't pay attention to the time when I was practicing. Li Tian sat down embarrassedly, and looked at All Might and Melissa who were sitting opposite. Puff haha, even during the professional experience, don't you forget to practice. All Might spat out a mouthful of old thank you, and laughed. Well, I learned something new this time, and I thought of something very interesting by analogy, so I can't wait to start practicing. While talking, Li Tian covered his hands with ease. The bag of All Might's blood was thrown into a trash can in the distance. That skillful technique made Melissa on the side stupefied. Is that your quirks, Li Tian, just now? Melissa asked impatiently, her eyes glowing with excitement. You are. Li Tian looked at Melissa with a strange flash in his eyes. For the girl who appeared in the movie, Li Tian naturally recognized it, but, shouldn't she be in my island at this time? Why did she appear here in Neon? It's because of the All Might retirement event early. I'm sorry, I forgot to introduce myself. I'm Melissa Heald, the niece of Mad Uncle, and I came to visit Mad Uncle from the United States. Melissa quickly introduced herself. Melissa, hello, my name, All Might should have already told you. Li Tian also replied with a smile. Yeah, Melissa nodded vigorously, and her face that had just calmed down became excited again. I pestered Mad Uncle to ask a lot about classmate Li Tian. That classmate Li Tian, the one just now was did you awaken quirks when you were 15? Li Tian vaguely guessed the reason why Melissa would appear here, nodded with a smile, and responded generously, yes. I'm sorry Li Tian, I was too shocked when I found out that you had awakened quirks, so I asked a friend of mine. Melissa is my friend's daughter, because I was too surprised, so I. All Might said shyly. It's okay. Li Tian shook his head, he had no intention of hiding this kind of thing, and his predecessor's 15 years of quirkless career were naked, so he couldn't hide it either. And isn't Green Valley just like me who awakened at the age of 15? There may be more and more teenage quirks who awaken in the future. It won't be so strange. Li Tian said like a joke. Green Valley. Melissa was startled, she didn't know Green Valley yet. Li Tian, is that Green Valley? Melissa looked at Li Tian in disbelief. If he hadn't misunderstood just now. All Might's forehead instantly dripped with cold sweat, and his heart skipped a beat. He almost forgot that Green Valley also awakened at the age of 15 or inherited one for all quirks. Li Tian looked at the expressions of All Might and Melissa, and instantly understood that All Might probably didn't tell Melissa about Green Valley. He's my classmate in Xiangyang. Li Tian said, slightly embarrassed. Then, he is also a quirks who awakened at the age of 15 like you. Melissa said, with a hint of disbelief in her eyes. Yeah, didn't All Might tell you? Li Tian pretended to be surprised and said, this wasn't because he deliberately tried to trick All Might, but was just the truest reflection of being an uninformed person. Green Valley is a powerful quirks of the power department that is completely opposite to mine. By the way, it's very similar to All Might. Mad uncle, you haven't even told me. Melissa stared at All Might with wide eyes. That, haha, because of the example of Li Tian boy, I wasn't so surprised when I found out about Green Valley boy, so I forgot about it for a while. All Might scratched his head and smiled sheepishly. That Green Valley. Melissa said. He also went to the workplace to experience. Wherever he goes, Melissa will not have enough time. All Might said quickly. That's it. Melissa looked regretful, and then looked at Li Tian again. Then Li Tian, can I ask you some questions? Of course. Li Tian nodded. Thank you very much. At the door of the restaurant, Melissa thanked Li Tian. She didn't ask about Li Tian's detailed quirks, which is definitely a secret among secrets for anyone, so what she asked was Li Tian's feelings and experiences before and after awakening quirks, and invite Li Tian to my island for physical examination and quirks examination. No, Li Tian shook his head and said with a smile, borrowing my island's equipment to conduct a quirks examination is something that most people dream of, and Melissa also promised to help me research food that can supplement my physical abilities. I should say thank you, I was right. How can? Melissa blushed and said that it was the equipment of my island, but how could she have that ability? Even his father would not be able to use those equipment to do private research. She promised Li Tian it's just an inspection of the equipment in his own research room. Of course she also told Li Tian about this. What Melissa didn't know was that if he hadn't said so, Li Tian might not have agreed. After all, unlike other people's cognition, Li Tian is very clear that his ability is not quirks, but a superpower, the Speed Force. If the test was carried out in a regular institution on my island, then he has a lot of ability. There were so many turmoil. More importantly, looking at Melissa who left with All Might, some thought flashed in Li Tian's eyes. Li Tian is very important to Melissa. It can be seen from the universal gauntlet given to Green Valley by Melissa in the theater version that allows Green Valley to punch with all his strength, and it can be seen that Melissa is really an out-and-out genius in scientific research. At least here in Neon, Li Tian can guarantee that there is no company that dares to pat its chest and say that it can make equipment support companies like Melissa's gauntlets. And Li Tian just lacks such a talented companion. Forget it. Let's talk about it when the time comes. Li Tian shook his head. After all, he is not the type who is good at calculating and can think up plans in advance to turn people into his companions. The golden Speed Force lightning jumped, and Li Tian instantly turned into a golden streamer and disappeared in place. Kyoto City at night. Undoubtedly, what the night brings to the city is not only the colorful neon lights, but it is the best umbrella for crimes. According to surveys by some non-governmental organizations, the crime rate at night is 3 to 5 times higher than that during the day, and some places are even more exaggerated. And the consequence of this is that there are more and more powerful groups of professional heroes patrolling at night than during the day. But it doesn't have much to do with Li Tian. 0.00. After all, before obtaining the permit, even if Li Tian obtained the temporary license, he would not be able to go out to walk the streets and fight for justice, let alone not obtain the temporary license now. Night is Savitar's world. In the shadows, a deep voice sounded in the alley, and a tall figure slowly stepped into the darkness. Oh, I'm going to wipe it. No, this line is too mediocre. Crouching in the dark alley, Li Tian, whose whole body was covered in silver armor, had a flushed face. After all, he is not really a teenager. Even if he recites this kind of secondary school lines, he is inexplicably shameful here alone. After calming down, Li Tian stood up again. It was inconspicuous when he was squatting just now, but he can clearly see it after standing up now. At this time, Li Tian, who is wrapped in silver and iron-colored armor, is a big man of more than 1.9 meters, which is quite taller than before. It is nearly 15 or 6 centimeters taller, and its figure is also much stronger. That huge armor is as spiky and hideous as the real Savitar in the 600th world, and the helmet that completely covers the head only reveals the same blue light as the body in the eyes, flashing in the dark alley in a blink of an eye. It looked a little weird. This outfit didn't look like a hero's but more like a certain villain's. It took Li Tian more than a month, and he took the time to study and experiment at super high speed with super speed, and hammered out the armor with his own hands. I can't say how good the defense is, but handsome absolute. And what Li Tian is going to do next, it is not an exaggeration to call it villains in this world. Standing in a somewhat dim alley, Li Tian looked at the neon lights of the bustling streets of Kyoto on one side, and the dark alley that seemed to swallow everything on the other. In the gap of Savitar's armor, blue light flickered. Some crimes don't deserve to be forgiven. A deep and hoarse second voice sounded, accompanied by some heavy footsteps. Li Tian raised his feet and walked slowly towards the dark alley. Under the moonlight, in a dark abandoned building. In the empty and dilapidated lobby on the first floor, a woman with long hair who couldn't see her face but had a fiery figure was tied to a chair and fell into a coma. And in the darkness around the woman, 6 or 7 figures hid in it and surrounded the woman tightly, not letting go of any corner. Boss, is this fool really that valuable? This is $100 million, can the old guy give it to you? A fat, pig-headed man with a height of 8 feet and a waist circumference of 8 feet said in a low voice in the dark. Following the opening of the pig-headed man, 5 or 6 other people around him also pricked up their ears and listened. Among them, there are alienated quirks who are similar to pig-headed men. There are also bald-headed men with scars on their faces who look hideous. There are ordinary-looking office workers, and there is even a cool-dressed man with a hot body, a woman. But what is surprising is that the last person to answer turned out to be a handsome young man who looked about 16 or 17 years old. Of course I will. The boy sat under the moonlight and stared at the laptop in front of him, and said softly, "This woman is worthless, but the child in her belly is very valuable. You can't imagine a woman who is almost barren how much the sterile old thing desires. 553, for children. Indeed. Haha, that old thing will definitely give money." The handsome young man seemed to be full of prestige among this group of guys. As soon as he opened his mouth, the other robbers next to him looked at him. However, this woman's quirks are really weird. She can even conceive that kind of infertile old thing. But this figure is really hot. The bald and strong man with scars looked at a long-haired woman who was tied to a chair not far away and fell into a coma, couldn't help smacking her tongue. Her eyes slapped fiercely on the sensitive area of the other party. The fire in his eyes was not concealed at all. And the other robbers were similar. When they looked at the woman's hot figure and pretty face, their eyes were extremely hot, as if a flame was burning. Be honest with me. This time is different from the previous few times. The hostage is not this woman but a child, and the blackmail target is not an ordinary person. The handsome young man frowned, glanced at the surrounding people, and warned, "When the money is in hand, you can find as many women as you want. This woman is now our cash cow. Hey, boss, we all understand, just look at her, and won't touch her." The bald man smiled, and then looked at the woman's eyes and scratched them a few times, and there was a flash of light in his eyes. "It's a pity. Like the same, without the slightest movement. Just understand, I think you don't want to experience the power of money after you get the money." The handsome young man looked at the people around him, a look of disdain flashed in his eyes, and he turned his head to look at the notebook in front of him again. Computer. After a while, drip, there was a crisp sound from the laptop. To the ears of the robbers around, this, DD sound, is absolutely heavenly, because it symbolizes wealth. The money is in hand. The handsome young man looked at the series of zeros on the laptop in front of him, and a smile appeared on the corner of his mouth. When the robbers next to him heard the handsome boy's voice, they all immediately became excited, but no one spoke, but each of them held a weapon and continued to be vigilant around the surroundings, but their eyes were aimed at the handsome boy's face from time to time. It's hard to hide his excitement. Feeling the stares, the handsome young man's mouth curled up with a disdainful arc, and then disappeared in an instant. He stretched out his hands and moved in front of him, and quickly moved on the keyboard in front of him. Transfer. This is the most common action criminals take after they get the transferred money. Hearing the tapping on the keyboard next to their ears, the robbers also became excited. This windfall is more than 10 or even dozens of times more than what they earned in the first half of their life, enough for them to eat for a lifetime. However, boss, someone is coming. A voice came from the headphones worn by the robbers. Someone. Swish, swish, swish. One by one, everyone present became vigilant, and all of them looked at the ruins outside the house with murderous intent in their eyes. But the handsome young man who was transferring the stolen money frowned. It's coming so soon, isn't it? The handsome young man closed his eyes, and opened them again after 2 or 3 seconds. A look of doubt flashed in his eyes. It will take at least 5 minutes for Heroes and the police to lock this place. Who is this sudden comer? But at this time, the sound came out from the earphone again. The sound was very small, apparently deliberately lowering the sound. It's a guy wearing armor all over the body. I can't see what it looks like. I've never seen it before. It shouldn't be. Before he finished speaking, there was a muffled sound from the earphone, and then there was no sound. The shadow has been killed. How is it possible? The only woman among the robbers cried out in disbelief. Her voice was not loud, but her shock could be heard. The other people around also had surprise in their eyes. Their companions who went out to watch the shadow quirks are called stealth. After stepping into the darkness, they will disappear, making it difficult to detect. But now, the other party was dealt with in less than 10 seconds after they found someone. Thinking of this, the robbers frowned one by one, their eyes became more vigilant, they looked at each other, nodded and walked out of the building. Never seen it before. Heroes who just debuted, or villains who wants to cheat on others. Different from other people who moved, the handsome young man was sitting still, with a flash of light on his face after a touch of strange color, but the movement of the hand did not stop at all, on the contrary, it was a little faster. The other side. In the corner of the abandoned building not far from the dilapidated building, Li Tian wearing the Savitar armor looked at the fallen villains at his feet, and the earphones dropped aside, with a flash of disdain in his eyes. Idiot with a light-up Bluetooth headset in a place like this. Cursing his lips, Li Tian turned his head to look at the abandoned building that was ignoring meters away, and walked over there with somewhat heavy steps. The silver armor was under the moonlight, and the blue light kept flickering. Li Tian took a step forward, and before he could go far, he saw several figures jumping out from the second floor of the abandoned building, rushing towards this side. Is it really a gang of criminals? Li Tian looked at the figures rushing forward from a distance, narrowed his eyes slightly, but did not stop walking. The distance of 50 meters is very short. Almost 2 or 3 seconds later, 3 figures appeared in front of Li Tian. The moonlight was very bright, and Li Tian could clearly see these 3 figures. One was a pig-headed fat man, 10 bald-headed and scarred brawny men, and 1 ordinary-looking office worker. Who are you? The pig-headed fat man looked at Li Tian, a blush flashed in his eyes, and he said in a deep voice. Li Tian looked at the 3 people in front of him, his eyes showed a thoughtful look, and after a second or two, Li Tian spoke slowly, and a hoarse voice sounded. I've seen you. On the police's arrest warrant, Koji Zutu, 3 robberies and murders, 2 burglary murders, a total of 9 people were killed, knife scars, 1 manslaughter by fighting, 3 policemen who were attacked and escaped, robbery 3 murders, Mexican Juan, 3 burglaries, 4 rapes and murders, 3 robberies and woundings. It's time to wash away your sins. Listening to Li Tian's hoarse opening, the 3 of them were not surprised at all. Is it a weak and unknown heroes? The scarred bald head moved his neck, a bloodthirsty smile appeared on his face, and with a wave of his hands, he turned into 2 sharp knives and walked towards Li Tian. It's really lucky, I haven't killed heroes yet. The other 2 on the side also stared at Li Tian. The pig-headed fat man immediately swelled up, more than 3 meters high, and the hair on his body was extremely lush, and the pig-headed human body turned into a tall wild boar man. The seemingly ordinary office worker started to move around non-stop, walking under the moonlight, bringing up afterimages, and the afterimages quickly separated and turned into independent figures towards Li Tian, rushed over. Very good. Li Tian twitched his mouth as he watched the 3 figures rushing towards him, and took a step forward. The weak speed force that had been covering his body surface suddenly increased, and golden electric arcs danced on his body surface. After passing through the gap in the armor, the golden light turned into blue light and flickered. And Li Tian didn't use all his strength to solve the problem with super speed like in the past. Instead, he maintained the increase of the speed force at about 5 times, kicked his feet, and rushed towards the 3 of them. The first contact with Li Tian was the phantom transformed from the afterimage. Li Tian didn't even move, completely ignoring the phantoms one after another and rushed forward. Clang! With a crisp sound, Li Tian directly grabbed a dagger stabbed from his side. Under the moonlight, the faces of most of the office workers showed disbelief, and he hurriedly wanted to let go, but boom! Even though the armor was a bit heavy, and the speed force was not fully activated, Li Tian's movements at 5 times the speed were still astonishingly fast. Once he got up and turned around, Li Tian kicked the man in the face and sent him flying out. With the weight of the armor and the inertial power of 5 times speed, Li Tian's kick is not too light or heavy, but it is not something that the villains of Quirks, an illusion avatar, can bear. Passed out directly. Since Li Tian recognized these people, he naturally also knew that their quirks, an ordinary person who creates hallucinations, has no practice value for Li Tian, so there is no need for him to show mercy. Along with Exakin Wani's fainting, the pile of phantoms also disappeared quickly, revealing the Savitar in the middle. Looking at the scene in front of them, Scar's bald head and the wild boar man didn't care at all. A look of contempt flashed in the eyes of Exakin Wan, who was lying on the side, and his eyes looked as if they were broken. They were originally just a group of criminals who had been summoned. They could not be called companions at all, so how could they have any unnecessary reactions? Don't think that I am also that trash, go to hell. Kid, the bald Scar roared, jumped up, looked ferociously at Li Tian in midair, and pointed at Li Tian with his blade-like arms. Tian chopped down. Facing the knife, Li Tian glanced at it from the corner of his eye, his feet changed slightly, and he staggered to the side. Even if the bald Scar landed and his arms swept across, Li Tian was still stepping on his feet, dodging easily, and casually with a fist swing, the bald Scar was pushed back. As expected, this step is used well. It really saves a lot of effort to dodge, and the counterattack in the middle is indeed much smoother. Li Tian looked at Scar, who retreated, and murmured in his heart. This is the first time he has used his steps in actual combat. But at this time, the 3-meter-tall wild boar man who looked like a tank attacked fiercely, shouted angrily, and waved his fists the size of a human head vigorously, thinking of Li Tian, and rushed over. But at this time, Li Tian stepped forward with his right foot, and rushed directly in front of the pig's head. The left hand wrapped around his waist jumped suddenly, twisted, bang, 10 times the double-speed fist directly hit the wild boar man's waist heavily. Rikido is not considered strong, but he hit the wild boar's weakness heavily. The wild boar man immediately let out a cry of pain, but he didn't back down at all. His eyes were red, and the pig's head was extremely ferocious like a monster. Huchi, huchi. Panting heavily, the pig's head continued to smash towards Li Tian, enduring the pain. As expected of a wild boar, its skin is rough and its flesh is thick. Li Tian still made a slight mistake with his foot, and easily dodged away. What? The wild boar roared and punched Li Tian non-stop. The scarred bald head repelled by Li Tian also reflected at this moment, realizing that a person might not be an opponent, so he also roared and rushed forward, waving a pair of saber arms. The tiger and the tiger are full of wind, slashing non-stop. Under the attack of the two, Li Tian, who was wearing what looked like an extremely heavy armor, was as light as a butterfly wearing a flower. He was not touched by the two at all, and looked extremely awkward. So weak. Looking at the two, Li Tian frowned involuntarily. One pig's head is powerful, rough-skinned and thick-skinned, but extremely clumsy, while the other's saber arm is extremely sharp. Even if it accidentally brushes the ground under his feet, it can easily cut cracks on the ground, but he doesn't know how to swing it. Originally, he thought how strong a villain's would be if he could kill several times without being arrested. The result turned out to be weak and pitiful. Li Tian frowned, and the lightning flashed in his eyes. With a strong kick, he rushed towards the two of them. His clenched hands suddenly swung out. Without the slightest mercy, the fists that exceeded the speed of sound hit directly on two people. Bang bang, 2 muffled bangs. The wild boar was directly blasted out, and Scar's bald-headed knife arm was also broken in response, and the whole person flew out like a tattered doll. Standing still, Li Tian couldn't help shaking his head. Practicing with this kind of villains, it would be better for Li Tian to do more training in the sea by himself. But at this moment, a slender whip shadow suddenly sprang out from the shadow beside it, with a zzz sound. Li Tian, who has been running at a low magnification speed, reacted in an instant. His super dynamic vision allowed him to clearly see the attacking whip in the dark with the help of moonlight, which was made of steel. The whip is covered with dense barbs, which looks hideous and terrifying. This is. Li Tian's complexion changed slightly, and he stepped back quickly. In an instant, Li Tian retreated 10 meters away. But at this moment, that whip shadow also whipped at Li Tian's position just now, and then received the Minister of Shadow quickly. A ferocious whip mark appeared on the ground. Li Tian had no doubt that if there was someone there just now, he would definitely be torn to pieces by the barbed steel whip. So handsome. A chuckle came out from the shadows, and then a fiery woman with a ferocious steel whip came out, looked at Li Tian with a smile and said, "Hero's little brother, you have knocked down a few scumbags that my sister managed to find. How should you compensate my sister?" "I don't know." Li Tian looked at the woman who appeared suddenly, and frowned slightly. He didn't have this person in the list of villains wanted in the best genist office. Which one just now? The power of the blow, if it is a villain's, will never be declared undisplayed. However, in this case, only villains can appear. Hasn't there been a villain's that has been witnessed before? Li Tian snorted softly. The timing of the shot just now and Rikido added this hideous weapon. Li Tian couldn't believe that this woman was a new villain, therefore, it could only be villains who have not been witnessed. Kicking off his feet, Li Tian rushed towards the woman without hesitation. What an impatient little brother. The woman grinned softly, but she didn't hesitate in the slightest. The ferocious steel whip in her hand waved without hesitation, like countless sensitive poisonous snakes, towards Li Tian came quickly. It's too slow. There was a flash of speed in Li Tian's eyes, and everything in front of him slowed down, but Li Tian's feet flashed in the middle of the whip shadows one after another with strange steps. "You're so nimble, but too naive." The woman's eyes flashed coldly, and the whip she held tightly in her hand twitched suddenly, and her quirks instantly enveloped her. At this point, it spun crazily like a storm, and the ferocious barbs instantly turned into extremely sharp blades. The whole whip instantly turned into a terrifying killer like a meat grinder. Accompanied by this change, the whip, which was originally extremely fast, went up to 3 floors in an instant, and the speed of its dancing soared instantly. The wind swept through the clouds, and tightly surrounded Li Tian, who had already stepped into the shadow of the whip. Tear Li Tian into pieces. You must know that the armor on Li Tian's body is just the shape he knocked out. Apart from covering his face, its defensive power is almost negligible, let alone this big killer that looks like his face can be torn apart. Okay. Li Tian suddenly applauded in his heart at this time, his eyes trembled. He came out this time to find villains to practice. Naturally, the stronger the villains, the better he will make an appointment. Maintaining this speed, Li Tian didn't use all his strength to activate the speed force, but just widened his eyes, brought his dynamic vision to the limit, and stepped harder and harder. After all, there is only one whip shadow in the sky. No matter how fast you swing it, it will not become 2 whips, and in the eyes of Li Tian, whose dynamic vision is already inhuman, this whip shadow can still be captured, which leads to in the sky full of whip shadows blue sky can always find a gap to dodge and move forward. How could it be? The woman's complexion changed instantly, seeing Li Tian jumping in her invincible whip blade. Incredulity flashed in her eyes. How could someone be so flexible? I don't believe it. With a low growl in her heart, the woman held the whip firmly in her hand, and frantically urged her own quirks, swung them, and instantly turned into a steel tornado capable of tearing everything apart. However, in the steel tornado, Li Tian seemed to be dancing on the blade, completely unaffected. Very good. Amidst the extremely dangerous steel tornado, Li Tian's face flashed a look of joy. Although in the moment just now, he urged Godspeed to increase a lot of speed to dodge, but at the same time, the frequency of his dodging is also several times higher, which means that the effect of his practice has increased again. 10 seconds, 20 seconds, 30 seconds of the steel tornado. After a full minute, Li Tian's dodging steps, which were still immature, became more and more proficient under this ultra-high-intensity training up. Almost. Li Tian felt his own footsteps become smoother, and looked towards the woman whose speed of swinging the whip had started to slow down. Swish! Li Tian kicked his feet, and easily passed through the shadow of the waving impenetrable whip, appearing in front of the woman. There was no intention of talking at all, because the knife in his hand directly slashed at the woman's back. Different from the embarrassment of confronting Hong last time, this time, after Li Tian specially asked for advice, he slashed down with his hand, and the woman fainted straight away. Ah, of course, Li Tian can't guarantee the specific severity of the injury. Standing where he was, Li Tian thought about it. Although the series of actions just now looked much more handsome than before, for Li Tian. It really doesn't suit my fighting style. Li Tian scratched his chin, the sharp fingertips collided with the steel chin creaking, and a look of disappointment flashed in his eyes. Color. Why does he slow down and fight villains slowly when he can instantly kill villains at full speed? Play cool. Oh, stop making trouble, that kind of thing. A look of confusion flashed across Li Tian's face under the mask. Handsome, it seems to be quite important. Forget it, it's not completely useless. When you become Savitar, you can avoid suspicion by using this method of fighting, and now I can turn around when I encounter a villain's like all for one who can't hit a punch. I've punched you a few more times. Li Tian patted his face, forcibly comforting himself, then walked towards the abandoned building where these guys came out and past the doctor. It's impossible for this group of villains to just gather here. On the other side, among the dilapidated buildings. The handsome young man listened to the quiet movement here, looked at the progress of the laptop in front of him, and a look of disappointment and murderous intent flashed in his eyes. For Li Tian outside, he naturally hated Li Tian, and wished he could kill Li Tian. This spoiler is broken into pieces. It's a pity, in 3 minutes, the money will be completely transferred. The handsome young man murmured to himself, and stopped his movements. I didn't get the money this time, and I was so alarmed. I'm afraid it won't be so easy to tie up this cash cow again. It's too risky to take her away now. Turning his head, the handsome young man looked at the fainted woman in the hall, with even more disappointment on his face. As said, with the kind of old kid who would go crazy for future generations and have money and a lot of channels, he didn't dare to act rashly. Even if he blackmailed him this time, he would take a huge risk. It's a pity, if she was found earlier, maybe a lot of money can be defrauded from all over the world by using this quirks. In front of the abandoned building. Li Tian snorted slightly, looking at the scene inside the building with some doubts. A woman who seemed to be kidnapped, and a 16 or 17-year-old boy who looked harmless to humans and animals. Is this kid the head of that group of villains? Li Tian frowned involuntarily, and silently increased his vigilance. If humans and animals are harmless, it is impossible to suppress those villains with blood on their hands. You must know that even the 3 pig-headed men, the knife-armed man and the hallucinating guy are weak and pitiful, but after all, they are villains who have repeatedly committed major crimes and have not been caught by the police and heroes. How cruel to say, but definitely cunning enough. And the woman who came out in the end, not to mention the general villains, can be suppressed. All kinds of thoughts flashed through Li Tian's mind in an instant, but his whole body was covered in armor, but no one could see it. Heroes, or villains? The handsome young man looked at Li Tian, who appeared in the hall, with a faint smile on his face, without any nervous opening. Neither, came out a hoarse and low voice. Understood. Qingshu young man smiled and nodded, so it's the new debut Dark Heroes. Dark Heroes. Li Tian didn't stop talking, of course he knew what the so-called Dark Hero were. He is not the first one to hide his identity and come out to be a hero. Decades before him, there were countless heroes licenses all over the world, but he hid his identity and used quirks to attack villains without authorization. Such people are collectively referred to as Dark Heroes by underground organizations. However, the official face is to regard this group of people as villains. But it is not pursued, not arrested, not wanted, let them go, unless these people are completely plunged into the dark, and make real villains' behaviors, then they will be regarded as real from the inside to the outside. Villains. What's the name? Qingshu young man asked with a smile. You're very confident. Li Tian narrowed his eyes slightly and looked at the handsome young man, then raised his legs and walked over. You can't catch me, the handsome young man raised his eyebrows and said confidently. Then give it a try. Li Tian's eyes were densely packed with lightning speed, and with a kick, Li Tian rushed towards the handsome boy maintaining 5 times the speed. And that handsome young man looked at Li Tian who was rushing over quickly, with a faint smile in his eyes, standing where he was, with no intention of dodging at all. Looking at the handsome young man who was already close at hand and could be reached with a single hook, Li Tian's eyes flashed vigilance, guarding against the handsome young man's quirks. But even so, Li Tian punched out without any hesitation. Li Tian's own strength combined with the sudden stop of the lightning speed brought huge inertia to the lightning-fast punching, and the punch was as fast as thunder, and then. Under Li Tian's stunned gaze, the handsome young man didn't use quirks to defend or dodge at all, and flew upside down, spraying blood in midair, and Li Wei could even see a few pieces of internal organs in the blood. Li Tian looked at the handsome young man who made him extremely vigilant with a bewildered face, flying like a tattered doll for more than 10 meters, then smashed heavily against the wall and then fell to the ground. What's the situation? Hey. The handsome young man lying in the blood suddenly laughed, raised his head, there was still a smile on his blood-soaked face, but the corners of his mouth twitched from time to time, obviously still very painful. I want to be a hero's. I don't know if a murderer can continue to be a hero's. The handsome young man looked at Li Tian. There was no fear of death in his eyes, only a playful face. Just because of this reason, you choose to die. This is super paranoid. Li Tian had a painful expression on his face. No. Li Tian frowned slightly as he looked at the handsome young man lying in a pool of blood. Although the shock of the scene in front of him made him unable to react for a while, but after thinking about it carefully, there is no reason at all. Taking my own life without any resistance at all, just to prevent him from becoming a hero's. How much hatred. And Li Tian couldn't see the slightest fear of death from the handsome young man's eyes. Even a crazy person, when faced with the imminent death, couldn't be so calm and joking. However, it is an iron fact that the person in front of him is dying, and Li Tian can clearly see this. Who the hell are you? No fluctuations in the tone could be heard in the hoarse voice. While Li Tian was speaking, he was also thinking about pieces of information that might be the villains in front of him at super high speed. Who? The handsome young man grinned ferociously. Of course it's villains. Very bad villains. Li Tian looked at the handsome young man. A flash of light suddenly flashed in his eyes. He saw that there was a very faint phantom attached to the body surface of this handsome young man, which was almost invisible in the darkness. Pursuing the soul, Li Tian blurted out directly, calling out the name. Possessed ghosts, villains, unknown real name, unknown gender, unknown age, quirks, guessed to be similar to the soul out of the body to control other people's bodies, hiding in the dark. The number of times of possession has been found to be more than 15 each time. He committed a crime of different size and controlled his body to commit suicide after committing the crime. I've been recognized so quickly. Hearing the name Li Tian called out, the smile on the handsome young man's face slowly disappeared. He curled his lips, and looked at Li Tian with displeasure. You are quite smart, a rookie. Is it? How about it? Do you want to mess with me after becoming a villain's? I am the person who likes to take in homeless companions the most. If I think about it, I will release those guys outside. I will take you in. If you don't agree, then tonight's video, it's uploaded to the internet. After the possessed ghost finished speaking, he didn't intend to pay attention to Li Tian. The pain of this tattered body was coming to his mind wave after wave, and he didn't want to continue to suffer for no reason. With a thought, a phantom like a ghost floated out of the handsome young man. The phantom is very faint, almost invisible in the dark, and very blurry, like a mosaic with 10 or 8 layers. It soared into the sky in an instant, passed through the ceiling of the building, and disappeared into the vast night. When villains. Li Tian looked at the handsome young man who was about to die after the possessed ghost left. He has already understood now that this handsome young man is probably a real young man, not some villains who kills people. Indeed, after this article is exposed, Li Tian's Savitar identity will definitely be destroyed. Be branded in the camp of villains. But, all of this is based on the premise that the handsome young man is dead. With somewhat dull steps, Li Tian walked towards the handsome young man who was lying on the ground. At the same time, the blue light in the gaps in the armor exploded, becoming 10 times and 100 times stronger in an instant. Under the moonlight, the entire abandoned building shone with a strange blue light, and it took more than 10 seconds for the light to gradually dim. Then, accompanied by dull footsteps, Li Tian walked out of the abandoned building, took several villains who had passed out with him, and disappeared into the vast night. The bright moonlight reflected the scene in the abandoned building. The unconscious woman was still unconscious, but the rope on her body had been untied, and she lay flat on the ground, and beside her was the handsome young man covered in blood who was tied up and thrown there. Although the young man's face was pale, his breathing it was gentle, and it was obvious that there was no danger to life. In the middle of the two Mollys there is a mobile phone with 2 screens, and the voice of questioning is still coming from the mobile phone. A few minutes later, a series of sirens broke the dead silence of the abandoned area, and a dozen policemen and several heroes rushed to the abandoned building. On the other side, Li Tian tied up those villains who had been knocked unconscious by him in an indescribable posture, and directly packed them all away. This group of villains is a big harvest of his hunting tonight. He turned into Savitar, and came out in the middle of the night, not only to exercise his skills, but more. Li Tian actually wanted to use this group of villains to study the effects of his speed force on people. What a manifestation. Of course, Li Tian has already done experiments on animals, and this group of villains is just for Li Tian to be on the safe side, fearing that people are different from animals, and will lose the chain at critical moments. No, the handsome young man who was possessed just now became Li Tian's first human experimental subject with honor. As a result, it was also very successful. Under the influence of Li Tian's supernatural speed force, the serious injury on the other party's body, which was fatal enough, quickly recovered hundreds of times, although it did not completely recover to its health before it was injured. But it is indeed not life-threatening. On the rooftop of a commercial building 5 or 6 kilometers away from the incident just now. That's it. Li Tian casually threw the villains on his body to the side. His experiment is not a dangerous experiment, and it can be completed in a few minutes. When the time comes, these guys will be tied up and thrown down. Standing on the edge of the roof, Li Tian looks at the police station not far away, with a twist of his mouth. Tick, perfect. Turning around, Li Tian walked towards several villains who were still unconscious. The speed force gives others the ability to recover at a super speed. Li Tian has already experimented, although there may be a little sequelae afterwards, it is undoubtedly very successful. When the speed surged after the Battle of Shenye, Li Tian faintly discovered that, unlike before, he could only passively use the speed force to enter the extreme speed mode. Now he can already perceive and even slightly affect the speed force in his body. Like using the speed force to temporarily grant the super fast recovery ability to others, it is also because of this that Li Tian can do it. And the next experiment Li Tian will conduct is to see if he can transmit the speed force to others, and create other speedsters just like the DC universe. He started to run in a silver armor emitting blue light. It wasn't the golden lightning that Li Tian brought out before, but a blue and silver phantom, and quickly ran around. At the same time, Li Tian controlled the super speed force he generated while running at super high speed to rush towards the comatose Mexican Juan. In Li Tian's opinion, this weakest guy is also the most bad. Even if a speedster comes out early, Li Tian is sure to take him down, and he can use his heart to cripple or even kill him. As soon as the speed force connected to the West Village Magic River, Li Tian could clearly sense the West Village Magic River through the speed force. With a thought, the super speed force linked to Shikun Wani's body quickly penetrated into his body, and the injury stunned by Li Tian recovered at an incredible speed. Almost in the blink of an eye, the other party's injury completely recovered, and as the injury recovered, Nishimura Wani's consciousness gradually recovered. His eyelids trembled slightly, and his fingers began to move slightly. Nishimura Genkazu's eyelids opened, his eyes were full of bewilderment, and he subconsciously raised his hand to touch his face. He instinctively remembered, I fell into a coma because of a heavy blow to my face. However, boom, Li Tian's figure appeared beside the newly awakened Mexican Juan, kicked him in the face, and directly sent him flying. In midair, Shikun Juan, who was inexplicably hit hard, looked bewildered, with deep confusion in his eyes, and then rolled his eyelids, and passed out neatly. No way. Li Tian didn't even look at Exakin Wan, who passed out again. Just now, when he linked the speed force to Nishimura Wan, the opponent's movements from waking up to raising his hand did indeed have the same super abnormal speed as the real speedster. It consumes too much. Different from Li Tian's running without any pressure. When running with the speed force, Li Tian immediately felt the heavy pressure from the speed force just by raising his hand after the opponent entered the speed mode. Protecting the other party's body and making the other party have super speed consumes an astonishing amount of energy. Just the act of blinking and raising one's hand is no less than the consumption of Li Tian running hundreds of thousands of kilometers. Try 2 more times. Li Tian took a deep breath, looked at the other 3 people, an inexplicable look flashed in his eyes, and then started the experiment again. The test results came out soon, and like that Exakin Wan, when these 3 people entered the extreme speed mode, they also needed to consume a huge amount of super speed force that Li Tian could not bear to move. Even, that wild boar man might consume several times as much speed force as others because of his weight. It seems that if other people want to use the speed force to accelerate, they need to consume too much speed force. Li Tian shook his head with a regretful face, but besides the pity, Li Tian was actually a little lucky, in his heart secretly happy. After all, he was just an ordinary person a few months ago. Of course, it would be better if only he had the powerful superpower that he finally obtained. However, if you think about it carefully, if you want to increase the speed, you must consume energy. The faster the speed, the more energy will be consumed. Li Tian murmured to himself in a low voice. As for why he doesn't need to consume such an exaggerated amount of energy to enter the speed force. Of course it's because he's a jerk. Continue to the next experiment. In a good mood, Li Tian ran again, linking the speed force to several villains. However, this time Li Tian didn't urge the speed force to integrate into the opponent's body after linking, but instead, tried to absorb the opponent's own speed. It is unbelievable to say that absorbing other people's speed, and speed, which is similar to conceptual things, can also absorb. This is some kind of second-rate science fiction. But, the speed force or the speed force is originally a mysterious power born from the sublimation of speed. It was originally a speed similar to the concept, why can't it absorb speed? In the DC universe, the same people with extreme speed can absorb the speed of others, or, more precisely, absorb the kinetic energy of other things to increase their own speed. This is the case with the most famous race between the Flash and the Cosmic God, absorbing the kinetic energy of the entire Earth, and the speed of the Flash is even faster than the space movement that occurs in an instant in an absolute sense. Bid successful. Li Tian felt a flash of excitement in his eyes as he felt the speed coming through the super speed force. The next step is, Li Tian directly disconnected the speed force link with those people. Haha, it hasn't disappeared. Li Tian suddenly became excited. Although this increased speed is insignificant, Li Tian can clearly feel that the speed has indeed increased, and this speed has not disappeared with the disconnection of the speed force link, but still exists in his body. Li Tian could feel that the concepts of the speed of the other people that existed in his body could be returned with just a thought, and there was no need to use the speed force at all. And if he doesn't want to return it, he can only borrow it for about 10 minutes at most at this speed, and then he will return it automatically. However, even if it is 10 minutes, Li Tian is very satisfied. For his speed, 10 minutes is really not short, and he can faintly feel that he can accommodate a lot of other people's speed. Even if there are enough people, his own speed can even be doubled or tripled. This is not a small number. For Li Tian, who has already reached the terrifying speed of Mach 5, 2 to 3 times, this is the terrifying speed of Mach 10 to Mach 15, 3 to 4 kilometers in 1 second, and Li Tian can do it in the blink of an eye. You can go straight out of several streets. Very good. Li Tian is undoubtedly very satisfied with this success, and then continued to do other experiments. In the study of the speed force, he didn't just have these 2 or 3 ideas that needed to be tested. After 4 or 5 minutes, Li Tian was content to let go of the villains who woke up and then fainted, and then woke up again. After tying these people tightly with ropes, and after adding some injuries to their bodies, Li Tian threw these people off the edge of the roof, but the height of 6 or 7 floors, there the rough-skinned and thick-fleshed wild boar was at the bottom, so it wouldn't kill anyone. Kyoto City. The Kita Ward Police Station. No, it should be the Kita Ward Police Station. Although there are indeed quite a lot of villains' activities in this area, it is already considered a relatively remote place, so it is not an important police station. It is just a small police station. This must be another accident over there. In the police station, an old-looking policeman couldn't help shaking his head when he heard the sound of sirens in the distance. These villains make trouble every day can't the trouble be stopped? How could it stop? After retiring from All Might, this period of time stopped again. Another policeman also shook his head and said, "This world is going to change." Boom! A loud noise suddenly came from outside the police station, which startled the two people who were on duty at night. Subconsciously, they pulled out their guns and became vigilant, aiming outside. There are villains haunting here, so they couldn't help being careless. The two men who had been vigilant for a long time came out. Looking at the tightly bound villains, the two policemen stared dumbfounded at the villains who were tied together and couldn't break free. As the police, they naturally recognized the wanted fugitives among these few people at a glance. Good luck. The two looked at each other, and instantly understood the meaning in each other's eyes. After all, they are old people who have been in the police force for more than 10 or 20 years. Even if they have never encountered this kind of thing, they have heard it countless times. On the rooftop, Li Tian looked at the two policemen who were excitedly notifying the headquarters that villains had been arrested, turned around, and slowly stepped into the darkness. The identity of Savitar. Li Tian has long decided that this is destined to be an identity that can only be kept in the dark, and will never be actively exposed to the sight of others. Even when using this identity, even Li Tian will use the speed force as little as possible, and his fighting style will completely change, striving to be completely separated from his main body. What a disappointment. This is a small dwelling, the heavy curtains are closed tightly, no light can penetrate, the lights in the room are not turned on, the only light source comes from 3 computer monitors that are on, and on the monitors, a series of data streaming information flashed across the screen quickly. In front of the monitor, a somewhat scruffy-looking middle-aged man's glasses reflected light. Looking at the monitor, he frowned, with a look of dissatisfaction on his face. That kind of injury has been rescued. That guy is still alive. Really, capable. While talking, the middle-aged man stretched out his palm and put it on the computer monitor. The next moment, a series of windows popped up on the screen of the computer monitor, and various data flashed in the windows. Sure enough, I can't find it. The middle-aged man put down his hands, shook his head, and sighed. Although this Quirks is indeed very strong in the internet world with his computer technology, it doesn't mean that he is omnipotent. Can't know everything. Just like this time, he didn't find any information about the Savitar who disturbed his game this time. Forget it, the Dark Heroes who just debuted must have left very few traces. Wait for a while, maybe this guy can become my new toy. He left and walked over to the small bed in the darkness. Lying on the bed, the middle-aged man closed his eyes, and a vague phantom floated from the man's body, then soared into the sky, and disappeared without a trace through the ceiling. On the bed, the middle-aged man was in the phantom. The moment he left, his head tilted slightly, and he immediately lost consciousness. On the coast more than 100 kilometers away from Kyoto, Li Tian's figure appeared here. After hiding the tightly packed Savitar armor in his hand in a crevice of a reef, Li Tian finally back to a training place he chose. Similar to the time in Binhai City, Li Tian's choice of seaside exercise location is also located in a secluded place that is sparsely populated and surrounded by mountains and forests. On the beach by the sea, wearing shorts, Li Tian walked into the sea with bare feet. The sea water at night was icy cold. Even Li Tian couldn't help shivering, until most of his body was submerged in the sea water, and after a while, the coolness gradually dissipated. However, this is not a good thing, but Li Tian's body temperature is dropping, so Li Tian will feel the coolness of the icy sea water dissipate. Standing in the middle of the sea, the night waves come one after another. Rikkido is not too big, but the waves come one after another, as if it never stops. If it is an ordinary person, it may be difficult to stand firm here, but Li Tian had long been used to standing in the sea, and he stood firmly in the sea without even the slightest resistance. Thorn. With a thought, Li Tian lifted his right foot and stepped forward slightly, and the speed force instantly enveloped his whole body and activated. In an instant, Li Tian's body trembled at a speed invisible to the naked eye, and a large amount of heat was generated during the trembling process, allowing Li Tian's gradually cold body to regain heat. 10 minutes, Li Tian murmured. He could feel that his body could support the shivering and heat generation for 10 minutes at most. After this time, the heat stored in his body would be almost exhausted. Generally speaking, Li Tian would not go into the sea for training at night. After all, it was the same as now. Just maintaining body temperature would consume quite a lot of physical strength of Li Tian's body, and he couldn't sustain the training for a long time. But, in the sea water, Li Tian moved his hands and feet, and murmured earnestly in his eyes, "I hope that what I felt before was not an illusion." Call. Taking a deep breath, Li Tian's whole body, lightning speed and lightning jumped instantly. Boom! Li Tian swung his fist, and a gap appeared in the waves under the night, and a small water splash exploded. On the surface of the sea, Li Tian, who only showed his head, looked at the splashing water in front of him, and couldn't help showing a smile on his face. Sure enough, it's not an illusion. Li Tian clenched his fist, and a smile couldn't help showing on his face. When he swung his fist just now, he didn't cancel the speed force at the last moment, but he swung his fist in extreme speed mode. Obviously, although the power of this punch is not as powerful as a full-strength supersonic punch, it is far greater than Li Tian's usual punching Rikido. This is what Li Tian noticed in the previous battles. In the ultra-low speed extreme speed mode, Li Tian could faintly notice that he seemed to be able to cancel the protection of the speed force to himself, or to cancel the protection of the world from the speed force. And it turns out, he was right. Before I couldn't do this in the super high-speed state. Apart from the fact that I had no control over the speed force, the more reason may be that my body can't bear the pressure of the super high-speed state. After losing the protection of the speed force, it will be completely broken, so the speed force will instinctively protect me. Li Tian said silently, feeling the speed force inside and outside of his body. Li Tian walked out of the sea to continue the experiment after thinking about it. The reason for the experiment in the sea is that the seawater can show the power of becoming stronger very intuitively, which is far more intuitive than in the air. Bobby found a target and hit the test directly. Come easy. Just now, he only maintained about 5 times the increase in speed force, and he didn't feel too much pressure. Now, he needs to know the maximum speed he can bear. 6 times, no problem. 8 times. 10 times, 12 times, I feel it. When Li Tian maintained the increase of the speed force at 12 times, and cancelled the protection of the speed force, Li Tian could clearly feel the pressure on his body, and the muscles began to growl. If it lasts longer, Li Tian could already imagine the consequences of his own muscle fibers breaking down. But, with a super fast recovery physique, Li Tian can easily withstand this simple injury. Continue. With a thought in Li Tian's mind, the arc of super speed force leapt rapidly, and Li Tian's originally tyrannical speed increased sharply again. 13 times, 14 times, 15 times, 16 times. Finally, after increasing the speed to 16 times, Li Tian's body was already creaking, and Li Tian could feel the muscle fibers of his body being torn as he moved his limbs. What's more intuitive is that at the 17 times speed up, Li Tian couldn't control the speed force to remove that layer of protection, as if the speed force's instinct was stopping Li Tian from continuing. It seems that my current physical limit is 16 times the speed. Li Tian silently stopped the speed force and began to think. Although the limit is 16 times the speed, it is obviously not suitable as a means of fighting under that limit, so, the most suitable speed for Li Tian's current battle is about 10 times the speed. Double speed should be the limit. But, under 10 times the speed, the inertia force that can be used without stopping the speed force, coupled with the super dynamic vision and nerve reaction speed brought by the speed force without hiding, is obviously powerful enough, and as a speeder, Li Tian, I don't think there is any situation that can make him choose to continue to hide and not use the speed force, but choose this desperate method. 10 times the speed mode, from now on it will be called rapid mode. If the super speed power is fully activated, it will be the super speed mode. The super speed mode will appear as the flash, and the speed mode will be Savitar's fighting method. Li Tian quickly decided down. The water stains on his body have long been dried under the rapid mode test and the super high-speed tremors that generate heat. Li Tian quickly changed his clothes, and then fully turned on the super speed mode, Flying, no, faster than flying he rushed towards his residence in Kyoto. But in this late night when Li Tian was busy, none of Li Tian's classmates was idle either. Bakugo, who is also in the best genist firm like Li Tian, even though best genist didn't teach him how to become stronger, but with the stimulation of Li Tian, he never stopped doing high-intensity exercises from the first day he arrived in Kyoto. Perhaps the quirks that have turned from yin to yang still have a hidden effect. After Bakugo transformed back, in addition to discovering that his skin is much better than before, he unexpectedly found that the power of the sweat secreted by his palms has increased much more than before. Even Li Tian secretly saw that Bakugo was debating whether to go to the yin and yang and come again a few times. Okay. Chapter 71. Most of the other students in Class A are not wasting their time, as the most intuitive people affected by Li Tian's behavior, that is. Iida-kun, the professional hero's slime shouted loudly. Yes, it was still the serious and rigid voice, accompanied by faint blue flames coming from the exhaust holes of the legs, the sound of the engine at full power, and Iida speeding towards him in the distance. Instantly appeared in front of a villains who wanted to escape, and blocked him. And the professional hero's slime who called Iida just now rushed over quickly and swallowed the villains directly. Feel beautiful, Iida-kun. Professional hero's slime encouraged Iida. Professional hero's slime, as the name suggests, is indeed a jelly-like slime. In the transparent jelly, the villains who was swallowed by the villains is tightly bound, it's hard to break free. Thank you for the compliment. This is what I should do. As a student of Shangying, as always, Iida's righteous words. The professional hero's slime on the side couldn't help but twitch slightly, watching Iida forcibly suppressing the 583 desire to complain in his heart. Different from the original book, the hero's killer stain was surrounded by 1,000 heroes who arrested the League of Villains during the Battle of Kano. After being caught as a windfall, Iida was still unwilling, but he did not go into the dead end just as paranoid as the original. It is even more impossible to choose a hero's office in Tsuchi randomly, but to choose a suitable hero's office for workplace experience. While absorbing the experience of becoming a professional heroes, it is also desperate to train yourself, and work hard to train yourself into a heroes that can bear the name of Ingenim. The temperature of the flame is enough, but do you want to burn the house next to it? Tightly control the burning range of the flame, even if the flame is surrounded by gunpowder. Don't light your fire until it touches it. Endeavor's stern roar kept coming. Not far away, Hong clenched his teeth. The sweat on his forehead was evaporated by the raging flames from the left half of his body before it appeared. Diddy. Endeavor's cell phone rang suddenly. Taking out his mobile phone, Endeavor glanced at the incoming text message, frowned, and then quickly looked at Hong. Stop it, there is a task assigned by the police, I'm telling you to follow me. Endeavor said, and walked straight out of the room. And Hong also stopped the flames half of his body, and silently followed Endeavor without saying a word. Originally, because of Li Tian's appearance at the sports festival, Hong, who was not able to fight against Green Valley to enlighten him, should have been deeply confused and hated, and shouldn't have appeared. But I don't know how Aizawa Shota talked to him, what he said, and he suddenly thought about it strangely. Although he still didn't forgive Endeavor, he went to the Endeavor Hero's office just like the original book. Dad's training on using fire. In addition, although it has not been officially announced, but as number 2 hero's Endeavor, after All Might retired, it has become the number 1 of Neon. Well, the number 1 Endeavor needs to be corrected. The grumpy Neon is responsible. Even if he is not willing to become number 1, Endeavor must always be running around to fight against villains. As number 1, he will do his best to suppress the turmoil, and following Endeavor, he will definitely not lack experience in fighting villains, is growing rapidly. There is also Toru Hagakuri, a childhood sweetheart who was most influenced by Li Tian. Different from the little transparency in the original book, now she has become an eye-catching little transparency. After the sports festival, as one of the most dazzling students, Yi Yin also received a large number of invitations from heroes' offices, and Yi Yin also chose his favorite hero's office workplace experience. With Li Tian's intentional or unintentional indoctrination during training with Li Tian on weekdays, the current Yi Yin is also growing at a flying speed. The last one to change due to Li Tian's influence is Green Valley. Compared with the desperate fighting style in the original book, which is not favored by others. Green Valley, which is fully covered by One for All, has been mastered in advance, and its appearance at the sports festival is quite eye-catching and highly anticipated. However, in the end, under the recommendation of All Might, I went to the former One for All friend Gran Torino for special training. And Gran Torino, who is a thorough combat faction, has a more straightforward training method for Green Valley. After a simple test, he directly took Green Valley to areas with many villains, and started training under his guard. I took the Villains Crusade tour. And as an insider of One for All, Gran Torino also consciously or unconsciously guides Green Valley's use of One for All quirks and the development of moves. At present, under the dual guidance of Actual Combat and Gran Torino, Green Valley is also progressing at a speed visible to the naked eye. And most of the others in Class A are also like this. Each and every one of them has experienced a lot during the week of workplace experience. In addition to Class A, the biggest winner of the sports festival, Class B of Heroes, has actually received quite a lot of invitations from professional heroes. Professional heroes with real vision will naturally not think that Class B is weak just because of their temporary performance at the sports festival. On the contrary, those professional heroes with discernment will not lose their enthusiasm for Class B at all. After all, from the perspective of quirks alone, the average level of quirks in Class B is actually slightly better than that of Li Tian and their Class A. Of course, this is the conclusion after excluding Li Tian, who is a bad guy. Time goes by in a blink of an eye day by day, and the 1 week workplace experience has passed quickly. Kyoto. As the number 3 professional heroes, Best Jeanist is extremely busy on weekdays, so Li Tian and Bakugo's departure was as quiet as when they came, and they were still quiet when they left. That fool, how dare, how dare. At the station, Bakugo's anger soared into the sky, and he was about to explode. On the side, Li Tian, one strong face line, serious, suffocation, solemn laugh, looked at Bakugo, who was 28 points, wondering what brand of styling gel Best Jeanist used. No matter how Bakugo's hair was washed, combs have no intention of changing back at all. Speaking of which, the haircut is actually not ugly, but for some reason, after matching it with Bakugo's face, I feel inexplicably full of joy. Bakugo p. Sooner or later, I'm going to kill that fool. When the time comes, Bakugo, you can give the Bull King an afro, and let him go out and parade in the street. Li Tian said with a smile on the side. Good idea, but I want to turn that fool into a bald man. As if Li Tian's idea had opened his mind, Bakugo said with a ferocious smile on his face. It's better to tie it into a double ponytail. Baldy looks good. Ah choo. In the Best Jeanist Heroes office, Chao Bangsheng Wang sneezed out. Hey, Niu Wang, do you have a cold? Is it because you are too tired recently? The cowboy beside him asked in surprise. It was the first time he saw Best Jeanist catch a cold. No, those two little fools should be talking bad about me. Best Jeanist rubbed his nose expressionlessly and hit the nail on the head. Haha, definitely, that's right. Cowboy laughed. Seeing the smiling faces of Cowboy and others, Best Jeanist shook his head involuntarily, and turned to look out the window with worry in his eyes. These two children, there is no one to worry about. Best Jeanist sighed in his heart. Not to mention Bakugo, a child with self-esteem problems whose hair roots are full of reports. Even Li Tian, during the contact during this period, Best Jeanist has also confirmed. This is definitely another problem child. Even, compared to Bakugo, Best Jeanist is more worried about Li Tian. He could see that what Bao Hao carried in his self-esteem from the bottom of his heart was his longing for heroes and his almost unshakable strong will. He didn't see this from Li Tian. Perhaps, in his eyes Li Tian is a good person and a good student, but definitely not a good heroes. Even if Li Tian's strength has long surpassed countless professional heroes, the same is true. He did not see the longing for heroes from Li Tian's eyes. On the contrary, he could see it from Li Tian's eyes and actions, to the very faintest disregard for the rules of thought. I hope you don't go the wrong way and step into the abyss. Best Jeanist looked at the blue sky and became worried silently. There are still 2 opportunities to experience the workplace in 2 years. I wonder if Xiangying and I can lead that kid to the right place on the road. Niawang, here is the consumption list for this week. Cowboy suddenly handed over a list. Then, the corners of Best Jeanist's eyes twitched imperceptibly. I don't know if Xiangying can lead him to the right path in 2 years. Best Jeanist silently looked up at the sky and meditated. Puff ha ha. A burst of laughter resounded throughout the corridor. Xiangying High School, Heroes Class A. Although I saw it in the group before, but. I can't bear it at all. Kirishima and Shiro looked at Bakugo, who walked into Class A, and laughed without restraint. Don't laugh. If you laugh, I'll kill you. Bakugo, who had 28 points on his forehead and bulging veins on his forehead, yelled angrily at the presumptuous 2 people in front of him. Boom. The 28 points on Bakugo's head exploded instantly with a roar. Puff ha ha. Ha ha. It exploded. Ah, no, my stomach hurts, ha ha. Not to mention Kirishima and Shiro, even the other people who didn't really want to laugh at the scene couldn't help but burst out laughing at the scene in front of them. What are you all laughing at? You can hear laughter from the other end of the corridor. The classroom door opened, and Li Tian walked in. As soon as he entered the classroom, Li Tian saw Bakugo's swollen durian head, with a smile on his face. There was a hint of disappointment immediately. What? It has been 48 hours, and the effect of the medicine has passed. It's a pity. I wanted everyone to see how good you are, Bakugo. 48 hours. Drug effect. Hearing Li Tian's words, Bakugo was startled for a moment, and then suddenly thought of something. He vaguely remembers that after being changed by Best Jeanist for the first time, it was easy to change his hairstyle back, and then, the next morning, he woke up and took care of it, happily looking at his arrogant hockey afro, and after washing his hair type became 28 points inexplicably. And, no matter how hard it is to explode again. Calculate carefully, the first day of workplace experience is not counted, the second and third days are 48 hours, the fourth and fifth days are 48 hours, the sixth and seventh days are 48 hours, and just now, count the time seems to be exactly the elapsed time of 48 hours on the 7th day. That is to say, the culprit who made him score 28 points for 7 days. Found it. I'll kill you. Bakugo lost his composure instantly, rolled his eyes and rushed towards Li Tian with a ferocious face. It seems that Ochako has been exercising very hard this week. Li Tian walked to his seat and looked at the awakened Uraraka beside him, and complained slightly. Because Cha-Cha went to the office of the fighting heroes, so. Yi Yin on the side couldn't say anything, even if it was the fighting heroes. This awakening was a bit too exaggerated. Go. Li Tian's super speed and lightning arc flashed away. After pressing Bakugo under his body and knocking him unconscious with a knife, he looked at Yi Yin as if nothing had happened and asked, by the way, did you meet any villains during this week's training? Or something. Hey, don't knock people out and act as if nothing happened, okay? Not to mention Kirishima and Shiro, who were facing Bakugo just now. Even Yi Yin and several others watched the scene in front of them with twitching corners of their mouths. Well, Bakugo is alright. Yi Yin said. It's okay, he just fainted for 10 seconds, and he's almost used to it. Li Tian threw Bakugo, who was pushed on the table, to his seat, waved his hand and said. Get used to it. What's the meaning? Everyone blinked and then saw Bakugo, who was lying on his seat, woke up, gritted his teeth and glared at Li Tian with a cold snort, turned his head and forcibly calmed down the expression on his face, before packing up his bag and getting ready to attend class. The way he behaved was inexplicably distressing. Kajiong was bullied so miserably. On the side, LVGU looked at Bakugo with a look of astonishment, and at the same time, there was worry about the childhood sweetheart in his eyes. He knew Bakugo's nature very well. Not to mention Bakugo, there is only one around, and Bakugo, who looks calm as if nothing happened, is also in disbelief. Look, are you all right? Li Tian spread his hands and said. This is an agreement between him and Bakugo. Because when I was at Best Jeanist, I don't know why Bakugo was always, inexplicably, angry and annoyed at Li Tian, who was gnashing his teeth and looking at him, so Li Tian simply made a deal with Bakugo for 3 chapters. Rush up to fight, and then you are not allowed to hold grudges after the fight, just do what you should do. This agreement has been in effect for 5 days, and Li Tian is almost getting used to it. Everyone. Xiangying High School, Stadium Y. This is a complex industrial park with trails all over the place like a labyrinth. In Xiangying High School, There are many similar stadiums, each of which is designed to allow students to adapt to fighting villains in various environments in advance. It can be seen that Xiangyang High School, as Neon Number 1 High School, has strong capital. Today's heroes basic class will be taught by me and All Might. Aizawa Shota and the shriveled version of All Might stood in front of the Class A and said in a low voice. All Might. Except for Li Tian, everyone's eyes couldn't help but look at the shriveled figure behind Aizawa Shota. All Might. This is the first time most of them have seen All Might in real life since the sports festival. Also. Even without those muscles, All Might still walked out with a smile on his face and a loud shout. His shriveled body was doing the previous showy movements, which made All Might look a little funny. But including Li Tian, no one laughed. Everyone looked at All Might with a sad face. Ashido Mina cried out, the tears of the other girls were rolling in their eyes, and even several boys looked at All Might with red eye circles. Alas, alas, alas. All Might looked at a group of students who were about to cry, and couldn't help but panicked and became at a loss. Don't cry. When All Might was at a loss, Aizawa Shota's shout came to everyone's ears. As heroes, now is not the time to cry. All Might has exhausted all its strength, not just to see your tears, but to see you smile for a better future. For us, a better future. What Aizawa Shota said was coupled with All Might's bewildered look on the side. Except for a certain guy who couldn't get excited, one of them was all excited, with firm gazes in their red eyes. The changes in the students also made All Might startled. The panic on his face gradually dissipated, looking at the students with firm eyes in front of him, and the silhouette of Aizawa Shota beside him, a smile suddenly appeared in his eyes. Sure enough, he still has a long way to go to become an excellent teacher. In the middle of the crowd, Li Tian looked at the red eye circles around him, blinked, and then reacted instantly. The weak speed force lightning launched, and the lacrimal sacs in the corners of his eyes instantly vibrated at super high speed. The eye sockets instantly turned red, and tears turning in the eye socket. No one can see that this is a husky mixed with wolves. Big. As the first hero's basic course after the workplace experience, I decided to hold a rescue training competition as a test for you to test your own achievements. Aizawa Shota said lightly, the specific rules, let All Might come to explain to you. Sleep first. Forehead. Everyone looked at Aizawa Shota, who took out his sleeping bag from nowhere and lay down on the side, and couldn't complain anymore. Ahem. All Might coughed twice, attracted everyone's attention, and then began to explain, the rules of this competition are that groups of 5 are divided into 4 groups. After sending out the distress signal, the 5 people set off in different directions at the same time, and then it was up to who could save teacher and me first. We're going to save All Might. Everyone shouted in unison. Everyone's eyes were sharp, and their voices were extremely decisive. All Might was taken aback, and then hurriedly said, then teacher will go to the designated place to prepare first. Looking at the figure of All Might leaving, everyone present had a feeling that they might have to wait a long time before starting the game, work. On the other side, Aizawa Shota, who just lay down in the sleeping bag and has not yet fallen asleep, opened his bloodshot eyes with a dissatisfied expression on his face. As for the reason, All Might left without grouping the students. Reluctantly standing up, Aizawa Shota divided the crowd into groups of 1, 2, 3 and 4 before lying down again. About 20 minutes later, at the gate of the stadium a group of students arrived at the rescue message from All Might. And the first group of players who were waiting everywhere in the sports field couldn't wait a long time ago. The moment the All Might distress signal was sent out, 5 people leapt out at the same time. Li Tian's super speed power, Green Valley's 1 for all full coverage, Bakugo's blasting flight, Ida's engine, Ciro's Spider-Man-like tape. It can be said that the 5 most powerful people on Flight are all compiled by Aizawa Shota in this group. The ending is already doomed, isn't it? The moment he received All Might's distress signal, the speed force fully activated, covering Li Tian's whole body. His legs bent slightly, Li Tian jumped vigorously, and the moment he retracted the speed force, Li Tian seemed as if like shells soaring into the sky. Almost in the blink of an eye, Li Tian's whole body appeared at a height of tens of meters above the sports field. High in the sky, Li Tian can clearly see the scene below. 1 for all is fully covered, and even more explosive than the fully covered Green Valley. Bakugo is gliding in midair, and Iida is speeding and jumping on pipes, just like Spider-Man Zero wandering around with the same launch tape, and All Might standing in the middle. When Rikido ran out of energy and rushed to the highest point, Li Tian laughed, aiming at the direction of All Might and quickly fell over. With the blessing of super speed, even falling, Li Tian's speed is the number of ordinary people 100 times. With a slightly dull sound, Li Tian's whole body directly slammed heavily on the platform where All Might was. Time: 1.02 seconds. With a grin, Li Tian showed a big smile at All Might. I'm coming. About 30 seconds later, Bakugo and Green Valley felt. There was no surprise for Li Tian, who was here long ago. When they were incorporated into this group, everyone including themselves already had a unified consensus on who would be the number one. However, Bakugo also showed displeasure on his face when he looked at Green Valley, who arrived at the same time as him. 30 seconds later, Zero rushed over while wandering in midair. As soon as he landed, looking at Li Tian, Bakugo and Green Valley, who had been standing here for a long time, Zero suddenly showed a helpless expression. Although this kind of place is very suitable for his quirks to exert strong mobility, but see who you are not compared with. Leaving aside Li Tian's speed that is impossible to match in his life, Bakugo's blasting power is far superior to his, let alone Green Valley's One for All inherited from All Might. If Green Valley can play with all the power of One for All, although the speed is still not as good as Li Tian, but it can definitely use the same way of traveling as All Might, so its mobility is naturally needless to say. After Zero arrived, another full minute passed before the last Iida rushed to the platform where All Might was. Although Iida's mobility is indeed not weak, this kind of labyrinth-like dense industrial area is not a suitable place for him to play. It doesn't matter which method Li Tian chooses to rush directly from the sky. Otherwise, no matter how fast Li Tian is, he will definitely lose 3 or 2 seconds in this maze-like place. The first place is Li Tian, but everyone should be aware of their application of quirks and the progress they made when they entered school. Pipe. Quote. All Might looked at the 5 people in front of him and said with a smile, everyone, just in this state, let's meet the upcoming final exam. Final exam. Li Tian was startled, and it took him a long time to realize that this place is not the homeland of his previous life, but Neon. There are 3 semesters in a year, so in comparison, the time of each semester is a little weaker than the previous life. And now, before the end of the first semester, there is probably 1 month. Li Huo scratched his chin. That is to say, after 1 month, it will be summer vacation, and then you can go to my island. Just thinking about it, Li Tian suddenly saw that All Might was gesturing to Green Valley, and whispered to Green Valley to find him after class. This scene, Li Tian has an impression. It should be the scene where All Might is about to tell Green Valley about the origin of One for All, but All for One has already been arrested, so I'm going to tell Green Valley about the origin of One for All, isn't it too late? Li Tian looked at All Might speechlessly. To be honest, as a hero, All Might is undoubtedly well-deserved, but as a teacher, All Might is a black teacher who doesn't even have a teacher qualification certificate. If it wasn't for All Might's identity, maybe one day All Might would be banned from teaching because he doesn't have a teacher qualification certificate. After Li Tian and the others finished the first group, the competition of the second group soon started again. Compared with Iida, whose slowest time was only 2 minutes in the first group, the mobility of the remaining group members was far less strong, and the speed was naturally not so fast. It took a whole afternoon until the get-out of class was over. In the first few minutes, the last group finally finished the game. Locker room. Sweat drenched almost everyone's uniforms. When the game fell into a delay, they were not just idly watching the big screen, but were doing high-intensity basic exercises. Treasure. I found a treasure. Suddenly, Putao shouted excitedly. Treasure. Unlike the last group, who were full of energy because they hadn't trained much, the others glanced at Putao weakly and casually. How could there be a treasure in the locker room? However, this must be the treasure left by the predecessors, Xiao Keshin's Cave of Redemption. Putao excitedly tore off a piece of wallpaper on the wall of the dressing room, and a small 2-finger hole suddenly appeared on the wall, in front of everyone. Originally, the boys who were dismissive all stared at the unusually conspicuous hole in the wall. Next door. Where is the next door? It's the girls' locker room. Putao's nostrils spewed air, and her excited little face flushed. PWQ. Stop Mineta-san, peeping is illegal. Iida immediately rushed up to stop him with righteous words. However, Putao's whole body seemed to have been injected with chicken blood, unexpectedly bursting out with amazing speed and strength at this moment, directly grabbed two sticky balls with both hands, just grabbed them and lay on the hole, letting Iida exert all his strength can't pull it off. Resisting Iida's tugging, Putao chanted frantically, moving his eyes towards a small hole. Li Tian, aren't you going to stop Mineta? Yi Yin is over there. Shoji said to Li Tian. Nothing. Li Tian shook his head, looking at the grapes that were desperately looking at the past like an idiot, that kind of bright hole in the middle of the wall, even girls can see it if they don't pay attention. What's more? What? Before Li Tian could finish speaking, Mineta let out a scream, and at the opening of the small hole, Jiro's earphones slowly retracted from the hole. You've been yelling for so long, are you the girl next door? Li Tian said quietly. Eyes, my eyes. Falling to the ground, Putao covered his eyes and rolled while crying bitterly. Seeing the tragedy of Putao, the boys spoke in unison. Deserved it. Li Tian has no interest in getting involved with All Might and Green Valley's private date in the afternoon. After school, Li Tian went to the secret training ground by the sea for training as usual, but this time Yi Yin didn't come with her. As soon as school was over, all the girls in Class A went shopping together. On the surface of the sea, Li Tian with full power was running on the waves, galloping at a high speed. Li Tian's face was full of wantonness and excitement. The more he ran, the more Li Tian fell in love with the feeling of running. This kind of wanton, free and carefree running gave Li Tian a feeling of flying freely, as if all his troubles were far away, fell behind. A golden lightning cut through the sea. Li Tian's figure rushed straight towards the beach from a distance, and stopped on the beach. Sweet clothes. Every time after the boring training, Li Tian would run wildly on the sea like this as if to vent, and every time he ran a lap like this, no matter what kind of irritability he was in, he would be cleared away, and he would feel better. Under the setting sun, Li Tian's excited expression gradually eased, and his excited mood gradually calmed down. Looking at the red clouds in the distance, a ferocious smile suddenly appeared on Li Tian's calm face. It's almost time, it's time for Savitar to go out. Since the first time he appeared in armor, in the next few days, there was no night in Kyoto that lacked the figure of Savita. The number of villains and villains gangs falling into the hands of Sawada has reached double digits. Circles and a small circle of police circles spread. Moreover, Li Tian really found out such things as being chivalrous and righteous, punishing evil and eliminating good. It's really addictive. Kyoto City, Kita Ward. Boom. With a muffled sound, a blood-stained figure fell heavily on the street. What happened? What? The figure that suddenly fell from the sky made many citizens on the street panic. This world where there are a lot of villains is not very peaceful. If the villains and the heroes are fighting, they have to run for their lives to avoid being affected. It seems to be a person, injured. Someone looked at the motionless figure lying on the ground, and said cautiously. Don't go there. Be careful. Someone also held back his companion who was about to step forward, with a worried expression on his face. There were not many people around who fell on the ground as if they were dead. Instead, most of them walked around and left quickly. However, no one stepped forward. After a while, the loud siren of the police car came over, and 4 or 5 policemen rushed over quickly. The 3 isolated the surrounding citizens and were alert to the figure lying on the ground. The other 2 policemen stepped forward to check the fallen figure on the ground. Sir, are you all right? One policeman was checking the figure's injuries, while the other helped the figure that had fallen to the ground, and tried to ask questions. Tanaka Police Department, he is Brock. The police officer who asked the question looked at the face of the figure, and suddenly his face changed drastically, and he almost threw the figure out of his hand subconsciously. Blake. On the side, the policeman who was checking the injury quickly raised his head to look at the other person's face, and then his expression also changed. Brock, it's not their police or any heroes but a vicious villains. There are as many as 13 policemen in the hands of the opponent, and even more people. There are as many as 20 or 30 people, and their personality is extremely cunning. Quirks is also very good at escaping. He never fights professional heroes every time, but just flees with all his strength, so he escapes from professional heroes several times. But that cunning Blake was beaten up and thrown on the street like this. Who did it? Tanaka's police department looked shocked and felt inconceivable. Whoever did it, caught this fool, but avenged our colleagues. A policeman on the side said, gnashing his teeth and looking at Blake, who had collapsed on the ground. He had a classmate who graduated from the police academy together, but it was lost in the hands of the other party. Police department. Tanaka nodded, but there was no relief on his face. Typing Brock like this, throwing it here, first of all, it is impossible to be the handwriting of professional heroes then. Is it the villains' internal strife, or that group of unregistered guys? Police department. Tanaka thought quietly. The group of unregistered guys are naturally the so-called dark heroes who have not obtained professional heroes qualifications, but hide their identities and ignore the rules and use quirks to attack villains. Strictly speaking, every dark heroes should be classified as a villains, because they all use quirks against villains illegally. But this part does not want to be controlled by the government, nor is it willing to use quirks to become an ordinary person, let alone become villains. There are many dark heroes and there are many powerful ones. For some people, the official will not offend if they can. At least not all of them can be pushed into the villains' camp. What's more, it's not a bad thing to have a group of vigilantes who don't need their funding. But when he was thinking, he didn't notice that on the top floor of the tall building beside him, a figure glowing with a faint blue light quietly retreated into the darkness after seeing Brock being taken over by the police below. Li Tian, or Savitar. The Brock below is his handwriting. Perhaps for heroes of other professions, Brock, who is desperate to escape with all his strength, will be as slippery as a loach and difficult to catch, but for Li Tian, the speed force does not need to be fully activated, it is just a burst of rapid mode, which is easy catch up with it. And throwing it casually on the street is also a habit that Li Tian has just developed. Compared with him carrying the villains and running all the way to the police station, it is better to throw it casually on the street and wait for the patrolling professional heroes or the police come and take it away. However, that guy just now is really powerful. Jumping between the tall buildings, Li Tian thought of the villains, Brack, just now. The opponent's skill is definitely much stronger than Li Tian's, and his fighting style it is also completely combined with other quirks, and the explosive combat power exceeds the level of 1 + 1 = 2. Even if you just want to run away, you can fight Li Tian with 5 times the speed mode. When he finally saw that there was no hope of escape, the opponent desperately tried his best. Li Tian's 5 times speed mode could barely resist him. And this battle also taught Li Tian a lot of things. On the edge of the rooftop of a sparsely populated high-rise building, Li Tian was about to take off, and stopped, looking at a few vans in a dark corner not far below. Although it was very late at night, the vans actually couldn't attract Li Tian's attention. What made Li Tian really stop was, beside the van, several muscular men were stuffing packages one by one onto the van. Go in. Not far away, there are a few small gangsters who look out for the wind and the like. Is this an illegal transaction? Li Tian's eyes narrowed, and he looked down, ready to rush down and make a move. However, don't move, came a stern voice. Li Tian's footsteps stopped. Of course, the voice wasn't calling him, but calling those suspected criminals below. Li Tian stood on the edge of the roof and looked down. Not far from the vans and the punks, 2 women appeared there. Who are they? Li Tian frowned, looking at the 2 women who appeared there. He couldn't help but feel familiar, but he couldn't remember. This is not good in the second dimension, too many faces are similar. It's hard to recognize if you change clothes and hairstyles. Woman. The villains, who were carrying the sacks to the van also stopped their movements, looked towards the source of the shouting, raised their eyebrows, and smiled grinningly. Zizi, didn't you agree to wait for the reinforcements to arrive? The blonde woman among the 2 women asked in a low voice while looking at her companion who was standing beside her. Those guys are carrying women. The green-haired woman called Zizi whispered while staring at the people not far away. Woman. The blonde woman's complexion changed, and she understood instantly. If it is about the goods or other things carried by the other party, of course they can watch the other party leave, and then follow it up, even if they can't track it for a while. It doesn't matter, but for human beings, especially women, how can they watch the other party leave? They couldn't keep up with each other's vehicles without a car or other means of transportation. It seems that we can only fight. Tushuan Luzi's eyes froze, he squatted down, and pressed his hands to the dirt floor. The soil on the ground surged instantly, and tall and ferocious clay monsters rose from the ground. This Quirks is. Li Tian from above looked at the movement below, and a flash of clarity flashed in his eyes for an instant. No wonder he looked familiar at the two people below. Isn't the other party the North American shorthair cat and ragdoll cat of the heroes group cat invited during Xiangying's sleep in the woods? One is the soil flow Quirks who can manipulate the soil, and the other is the auxiliary search Quirks, which can clear up all the intelligence of up to 100 people in sight, even the location and weaknesses. Why are they here? I remember that the cat group's activity area should be in the hills and fields, and they are rescue heroes. Did they come to Kyoto to play? Li Tian looked at the scene below and narrowed his eyes slightly. Strictly speaking, these two women are not fighting type. Oh, heroes combined cats North American shorthair cat and ragdoll cat. In the middle of a group of villains. 10 villains stepped forward and grinned. Li Tian can recognize these two people because the other is the professional heroes who is one of the few appearances in English and Chinese, so he is very impressed, but the villains of the other party can recognize the quirks of the North American shorthair at a glance. The two of them in urban activities are really amazing. Hehe, it's really lucky. Although you are a little older, the status of the two of you as professional heroes can double your price. Villains Hamasaki Yukyu grinned. As expected, is it a female trafficking group? Tomoko Shiratoko, also known as the puppet cat, had an extremely ugly face. For this kind of criminal group, it is undoubtedly that all female heroes and even all women are disgusted. Everyone, the opponent's quirks are used to manipulate the soil flow and search. Before attacking, please do not use quirks. Katsuo Hamasaki shouted loudly. Clear, got it, boss. The figures on the side grinned and walked towards the two women, moving their hands and feet one by one, but they rarely used quirks, only a few body-strengthened quirks were used, and they rushed towards the few clay monsters. Sure enough, I've been recognized. The face of North American shorthair cats changed slightly. Originally, they were not dominant in numbers. Villains' quirks are almost unknown, and now their quirks are still recognized by villains. Up. Deadlock. No, crisis, absolute crisis. The number of villains is 26, all of them are physically fit males, among them are 8 body-strengthened quirks, and the rest are unknown. The puppet cat quickly repeated the information she could see, and tried its best to support North America short-haired cat. On the rooftop, Li Tian's incarnation of Savitar looked down at the battlefield below. He was hesitating whether he should go up and help. Of course, it's not because he's afraid of these villains, or because he's afraid of appearing in front of professional heroes, he's just faintly heard the conversation below. A group of human traffickers, and a group of women selling houses. For this kind of villains, Li Tian naturally wished to get rid of them as soon as possible. But, Li Tian thinks that the group of villains below is not so simple. The actions of the other party are not like a small criminal group, but more like a squad of a large criminal group. Of course, this is just what Li Tian thinks, not necessarily correct. But what if? In case the other party is really just a small team, if he saves the two of them and the people in the car now, there may be more women and even other people in danger. This is also the reason why Li Tian hesitated. Wait and see. Taking a deep breath, Li Tian's gaze became firm. If he wants to intervene, Li Tian can choose to help at any time. Now is not the time for him to take action. What he needs to do is to waiting for the opportunity to save more people. After making the decision, Li Tian didn't hesitate any longer, and calmed down to hide his body and watch the battle below. No, that can't be called fighting at all. Although the warcraft made by quirks, a North American shorthair cat, is not weak in combat power, but in the city, there are concrete steel bars and asphalt roads everywhere, and the soil for her to drive is extremely rare. In addition, these villains, none of them are weak. Just the 8 villains who exposed the strengthened or alienated quirks blocked all the earth monsters she created, while the remaining dozen or so people surrounded the two of them. 2 women who are weak in melee combat, and quirks can't fight, and a dozen vicious villains who haven't exposed quirks, naturally don't need to say much to solve it. Almost in the blink of an eye, the leader Hamasaki Ryu activated his quirks, taking advantage of his unpreparedness, directly hypnotized the two women, causing them to fall into a coma. And the moment the North American shorthair cat fell into a deep sleep, the earth monsters that were still struggling coughed lightly and scattered, turning into pairs of dirt clods. The battle lasted only a minute or two from the beginning to the end. That is, it ended within a few tens of seconds after Li Tian decided to hide. Even Li Tian was a little speechless at this time. With such a disparity in combat power, they stood up without hesitation and wanted to block this group of villains. It should be said that he is really self-sacrificing for others, or that he is out of his mind. He didn't believe in the quirks of Ragdoll, and he couldn't see the huge difference in combat power between them. There should be someone behind. Li Tian was thoughtful. How to say, it is also a professional heroes, so it doesn't mean you don't even have this point. The North American shorthair cat and the Ragdoll cat who fell into a coma were thrown into the van with a set of sacks by the gang. It can be seen from this that Hamasaki Yukyu is very concerned about his quirks, Tianfan Baeksan. Even if they knew that these two were professional heroes, they threw them into the van casually like everyone else. Soon, the sacks carried out one after another from the abandoned building were loaded into 5 vans. Li Tian reckoned that if these 20 or so big men were removed, there would be at least 20 or 30 sacks in the van, and a sack means one person, which means 20 or 30 people who were arrested. After the loading was completed, these people did not clean up, but also packed into the vans, and drove directly into the dark alley beside them. Observing carefully, Li Tian could find that, after the 5 vans left, the piles of mud clods here still had obvious battle traces, but there was no trace left on the ruts of those vans. Apparently, there's some sort of special quirks on the other side. Li Tian took a deep breath, and quickly moved the Savitar armor on his body. After a while, the blue light in the gap of the Savitar armor after being refracted by the light reflected by the Speed Force lightning disappeared. This is a small mechanism that Li Tian thought of when making it. It can thicken the armor at ordinary times, and when it is pushed down, it can cover up all the blue lights used for handsomeness, which is convenient for stealthy actions. It is very simple and practical, isn't it? After getting ready, Li Tian instantly broke out extreme speed mode 10 times. Activate. The opponent's convoy had just left. Li Tian caught up with the 5 vans easily, then slowed down, quietly followed them not far away, hiding his figure, and was ready to go to their lair. However, the other party's next actions shocked Li Tian. These 5 vans did not follow Li Tian's idea to go to the lair, but turned around in the northern district of Kyoto City, and the previous scene appeared 3 times in succession. Get in the car, sack. From the initial 5 vans, it soon became 8 vans. Different from the previous 5 vans, there were no figures of those criminal groups in the 3 new vans. Except for the driver and the co-pilot guard, the people behind them were all people pretending to be trafficked. After adding the first 5 cars are also added, Li Tian estimated that in this convoy, there were at least 60 people who were caught. Li Tian took a deep breath, the coldness in his eyes became more and more fierce. Some people don't deserve to be forgiven. Following this convoy, Li Tian tracked it for a full 2 hours. Finally, the van convoy that became 10 vehicles dispersed and turned into a 3-3-4-3 team van convoy and left Kyoto North District. Looking at the 3 vans leaving separately, Li Tian's face was slightly solemn. Although he guessed that the destinations of these people were all in one place, he dared not, and could not bet. I hope you won't be seen. Li Tian murmured silently in his heart, and when he moved his feet, the Speed Force suddenly exploded at full speed. In an instant, Li Tian's speed soared to the fastest, Mach 5, surpassed Mach 5 and even approached the rapid explosion of Mach 6. Li Tian who was running at high speed suddenly split into 3, and 3 Li Tians wearing the Savitar armor appeared in the world at the same time. Doppelganger. This is a newly developed ability by Li Tian. Originally, it was intended to be used as the trump card of the Flash, but it was unexpectedly used for the first time as the identity of Savitar. No words needed, the moment Li Tian's avatar appeared, it possessed all of Li Tian's own thoughts. The 3 of them didn't say a word, each chose a convoy, then slowed down and followed them in hiding. 15 minutes later the villain's team and Savitar left. Beside the first abandoned building, the remaining 2 of Heroes Group Cat, Mandalay Cat and Tiger came here with more than a dozen professional heroes and police cables. Looking at the messy battlefield, both the Mandalay Cat and the Tiger looked extremely ugly. The piles of dirt can be clearly judged to be caused by the quirks of the North American shorthair cat. Moreover, this is obviously a scene that will only appear after the defeat. Have the North American shorthair cat and ragdoll cat been taken away? Tiger said in a low voice with an ugly face. It looks like it is. The Mandalay Cat's expression was not good. The four of them came to Kyoto this time not for any heroes' activities but simply for fun. No one thought that they would encounter such a thing during their trip. The faces of other professional heroes on the side are also not very good looking. As a local professional heroes in Kyoto, their colleagues encountered a large criminal group when they were playing in Kyoto and were arrested. The faces of these patrolling professional heroes. Report, there is a discovery here. As soon as they appeared at the scene, several of the police who searched separately shouted loudly. Have you found anything? Everyone rushed towards the policeman. After getting closer, everyone saw what the policeman found. Character. Text made of clay. It's left by a North American shorthair cat. The Mandalay Cat said quickly and checked it carefully. The text left by this piece of soil is the last message left by the North American shorthair cat when it knew it was invincible. To the effect that, a criminal group of human trafficking from villains, there are 26 people, all male, 8 of them are strengthening or alienating quirks, and the rest are unknown. The other party's transportation is 5 vans, 2 silver gray, 2 red cars and 1 bright yellow, with puppet cats on board. There are a total of 33 women. In addition, it is suspected that the place is a small unit of a large criminal group, and there are more victims and villains. The series of information is very long. The North American shorthair cats almost wrote down all the information they could find at that time. It was very detailed, and the other places were also the same information, but they didn't know the final destination of the other party. The information is not there. But, enough. A police officer's face flashed a look of seriousness, and then he quickly took out his mobile phone and started to contact the police headquarters. It may involve 2 professional heroes, at least 33 abducted women, and information about a suspected large-scale trafficking criminal group. How could the police not act? And those professional heroes also took action. If the attack on the North American shorthair cat and ragdoll cat in Kyoto made them feel sad, then the 33 kidnapped women and the rampant large-scale criminal group made them feel sad. Totally annoyed. This is a disgrace to the honor of being a professional heroes. Must find them. This is the common belief of the police and professional heroes at this time. The scene in front of them gave Mandalay Cat and Tiger a little hope. No one knows the police and the power of professional heroes better than professional heroes. They looked at each other, and the eyes of the two became extremely firm. North American shorthair, ragdoll, waiting for us. Thousands. It was late at night. Even on the roads in Kyoto, there were very few vehicles, so even vans were traveling very fast. In just over half an hour, Li Tian saw the sign of Osaka. Osaka. Li Tian frowned, and suddenly had a bad premonition. Absorbing all the memories of his predecessor, Li Tian actually knew a little bit about the geographical situation of the neon side. Here in Osaka, there are Port of Osaka. Even in the middle of the night, the place is still in full swing. Forklift trucks leave with goods, or come here. In a remote corner of Osaka port, Li Tian was wearing the Savitar armor and looking there from afar. Whoosh! A black shadow flew quietly to Li Tian's not far away. Savitar. That is Li Tian's clone. Seeing the clone coming, Li Tian wasn't surprised at all. 3 convoys, 3 tracking clones, finally arrived here. Li Tian, that bad premonition has come true. For Li Tian, who is well-informed, movies and TV series, it is normal for such large-scale human trafficking to use ships, and even the place where the trafficking is most likely to be on the other side of the ocean, in a foreign country, carrying the cargo ship with a large volume is really suitable. So, sure enough, the previous one was just a small team. Li Tian looked over there from afar, with a hint of coldness in his eyes. He followed the first convoy when it arrived. During this time, except for him, in addition to the 3 convoys that were following, there were also many vehicles driving in. There were vans like that convoy, pickup trucks, and even a big truck that came in. Although Li Tian can't be sure that every car is filled with the same people as the convoy just now, but this corner of the port is definitely not normal. Lurking in the darkness, Li Tian's eyes flicked over the group of security guards at the entrance of the port, and then looked elsewhere. In addition to the security guards on the surface, there are at least 8 secret sentries in the dark, and countless cameras monitoring. This kind of tight defense, no matter how you look at it, it doesn't look like an ordinary port. Li Tian's eyes, the coldness is even worse. He has a feeling, tonight, he will see a world completely different from the surface. For the port in front of him, unless Li Tian uses the speed mode with all his strength, it will be difficult to sneak in quietly from the entrance. But Li Tian has made a decision long ago. Savitar will never use the speed mode, at least, this kind of ability that can be connected to him at a glance must not be used. How to sneak in? Li Tian looked at the brightly lit place from a distance, but filled with the rare dark place in the world, thinking. How about? A sharp cold light flashed in Li Tian's eyes. How about a perfect infiltration? Near Osaka Bay, the owner of Lin Park. Li Tian looked at the river leading directly to Osaka port in front of him, and walked over without hesitation. After all, he couldn't make up his mind to make a perfect infiltration. In his previous life and present life, he didn't even kill a chicken. He couldn't do it all of a sudden, at least. Now he can't do it. In the cold sea water, Li Tian pulled the box of the Savitar armor and sneaked from the bottom of the sea towards the direction of Osaka port. With the trembling heat of super speed, coupled with the speed and strength in the rapid mode, Li Tian in the seawater is like a fish swimming, moving forward quickly. The Osaka Bay is already far away, and the giant ships stagnant in the harbor look like ferocious giant beasts in the dark night. Suddenly, Li Tian, who had already approached that place of Osaka Bay, froze, and then suddenly turned into a flying fish, whoosh hid to the side of a moored ship. Sticking his head out, Li Tian looked at the somewhat remote corner of the port from afar. Sure enough, it's not that simple. Li Tian narrowed his eyes slightly, staring at an almost invisible shadow on the dark water in the distance. It was a person, and the other was hiding in the water. Villains with only one head showing, a water quirks villains. And looking around, almost every 500 meters, there is a secret sentry lurking in the sea to watch out for the surroundings. The small half of the port is not to say that it is surrounded and airtight, but if the movement is a little louder, it may cause commotion. Li Tian couldn't help but thought of Yi Yin. If she was here, she would be able to sneak in with him easily. Feeling a little bit, Li Tian took a deep breath, and dived directly into the sea. There is no abnormality in the B-36 area. On the dark water surface, a villains with a lizard-like head whispered to report. Very well. C-36 will pass by soon, you can come back. An order came from the lizard man's earphone. Yes, the lizard man replied in a low voice, with a smile on his face. Even though his quirks are not afraid of water, but now it's just the beginning of summer, and it's late at night, and the seawater is extremely cold. If he stays here for a long time, even if he is in good health, he will definitely catch a cold. The most important thing is what's more, it's uncomfortable for him to swim in the cold sea water. In the water, the lizard man turned around and swam towards the shore with a flutter. Not far away, another figure also swam towards this side with a flutter. This is C-36 who came to change shifts. But what they didn't realize was that in the short moment when the two of them changed shifts, a figure like a fish swimming in the deep sea swished through their so-called jurisdiction area. PFF'd. At the corner of a freighter, Li Tian's figure emerged from the sea, exhaled heavily, and then took a big breath. Looking sideways at the seemingly tight but actually full of loopholes that he passed through just now, he circled one side of the freighter and slowly swam towards the shore. Approaching the shore, Li Tian pulled up the box of Savitar's armor dragged behind him, quickly changed into that suit of armor, and then went ashore while the villains on duty at the port didn't pay attention. Compared with the various sentry monitors that are tight on the outside, the interior of this small port is very loose. There is no sentry at every 10 steps and every 5 steps as Li Tian imagined. There are only a few patrol teams. Quick, quick, the ship to receive the goods will be here soon, hurry up and put the goods in the boxes. Hey, are the medicines in the box ready? There are quite a few quirks in this shipment who are not weak. Before they reach their destination, they must not have the strength to move. What, You are still on the road, why are you so slow? The ship to receive the goods is coming soon. Hurry up, it won't be waiting for you in less than 10 minutes. Accompanied by some noisy shouts, at first glance, this pier actually has an atmosphere of being in full swing and working together to get the job done. Pity. The people who worked, each of them were either with bulging muscles and scars all over their bodies, or they were vicious and screaming children. Looking at them one by one, they all looked like good people. Moreover, the so-called goods carried by these people are all human beings. In the crevices of the container corners, Li Tian looked at the ones being carried out of the sacks one by one, and thrown into the cargo boxes that looked like containers but were indeed cages inside. Li Tian looked there in shock. He realized that he still underestimated this criminal group. The sacks were moved out of the car one by one, and the people in the sacks were moved into the cargo box. In just this moment, Li Tian estimated that there were nearly 1,000 people in the cargo box. And looking around, almost all of them are unconscious women. They are too far away to see their faces, but they are probably not bad, and there are big and small, tall and short, with hot bodies, and there are also many graceful figures. And Li Tian can also see quite a lot of alien quirks possessed, such as the Catwoman who has awakened the cat quirks but still looks like a human, the bunny girl who has awakened the rabbit quirks, etc. All kinds of strange women. Even, Li Tian saw a few cute little girls who looked like porcelain dolls. This is definitely not a criminal group in Kyoto or Osaka. Li Tian looked at the villains who were carrying the young girls. His eyes were extremely cold, even full of killing intent. Hiss. Ono Yudo was unpacking the sack and moving the woman out of it, when suddenly his whole body trembled, a chill came to his mind, and the movements of his hands couldn't help but pause. Huh, what's the matter? On the side, another black-skinned burly man who was unpacking the sack with him couldn't help but stared at this place in confusion and asked in a deep voice. Oh, it's all right, it's just that there is a cool wind blowing in, and the night at the beach is cold. Yudo Ono shook his head, responded casually, and was ready to continue working. That person didn't care either. Although they belonged to the villains group, they didn't know each other. They just asked a casual question, just when the two were about to continue working. Tom tom, tom tom. Slightly dull footsteps came from the dark corner of the container beside it. Okay. Ono Yudo and the black-skinned burly man stopped their movements at the same time, not only them, but also other people beside them, and their movements stopped one after another as if they were contagious, staring into the distance. Who is it? Someone jumped out in an instant and shouted in the direction of the source of the footsteps. There was a pause for the dull footsteps, but then they sounded at a faster frequency. Not good. At this moment, everyone understands that this is definitely a professional heroes or someone who meddles in their own business. Although they were surprised that someone could invade here, they didn't have the slightest fear or panic when someone invaded. Instead, they all showed hideous expressions. They were villains. What's more, in this area, except for their specific internal communication tools, other signals have long been blocked, and information can never be transmitted. Here, they have hundreds of companions and thousands of hostages in their hands. Even if there are dozens or 20 professional heroes or a large police force, they are not afraid, let alone. Now it doesn't look like a large army is coming. No need to remind, the movement here has already caused warnings in several other areas. The villains who is in charge of patrolling in the distance rushed over quickly, and the person who seemed to be the captain even showed his special characteristics. The walkie-talkie began to give orders. Let the periphery be vigilant to prevent people from escaping. Stab. A series of explosions sounded, and more than a dozen people stood up directly, turning into monsters and shooting in front of everyone, and the other villains behind them also prepared quirks one by one, and even a few people took out their quirks. He took out his gun and aimed at the gap in the container. However, just as the footsteps were approaching, they suddenly stopped. What's going on? Someone couldn't help frowning. On top, suddenly someone exclaimed, raised his finger and pointed to the sky above the direction of the footsteps, and many people present looked up in an instant. It was a dark figure. Boom. A villains couldn't wait any longer, and instantly condensed a ball of fire, aimed directly at the figure and threw it over. In the dark night, the light of the fireball was extremely conspicuous, and it flew directly to the side of the shadow. That's their companion. Not good. Everyone who looked up and saw the scene in front of them was startled, and then reacted instantly, turning their heads to look in the direction just now. But this short moment was enough for Savitar to rush into them. Boom! The Savitar, rushing into them, was like a wolf entering a flock of sheep. With one punch, the frontmost Quirk's villains, who was about 2.5 meters tall and looked like a monster, was blown away with a single punch. The person who was blown away smacked 3 or 4 villains and vomited blood one after another, unable to fight anymore. This scene made the villains next to him stunned for a moment, but after that, none of them retreated, but each of them rushed over with ferocious and bloodthirsty expressions. Those who can do this business on such a scale will definitely recruit outlaws and thugs. This kind of scene can't scare them. Pity. No matter how ferocious the ferocity is, the difference in strength is the difference in strength. They were stunned, but Li Tian wouldn't be stunned. Almost in the blink of an eye, Li Tian seriously injured several people one after another. Facing densely packed dozens of villains, Li Tian, who incarnated as Savitar, decided not to use the speed mode, but he was not so pedantic that he didn't even use the invisible ability of speed thinking. Originally, the strength and speed have been increased by 10 times, and the thinking nerve reaction of ordinary people is being lengthened by 100 times. The strength that Li Tian erupted at this time was not something these people could resist at all, and the scene he saw before made Li Tian's heart burn with anger, and he had no intention of holding back his hands at all. What's more, if one person is up against dozens or even more villains, even if Li Tian has full confidence in his own strength, he has no room to hold back at all. Every move is aimed at maiming or even killing the villains. To go. Mr. Shanju, do we really need to prepare so many high-end goods and still use such a good warehouse? A middle-aged man who looks polite looked at the container not far from the window and said in a deep voice. Although the container looks dilapidated on the outside, the 6 sides inside, including the ground, are all covered with upholstered walls. There are lights on the ceiling that are not bright, but look good, and some simple small furniture are fixed on the ground. It looks surprisingly low luxury. As for the goods, they are naturally those who will be packed into these containers. Of course it is necessary. The person who spoke was a young man who looked harmless to humans and animals. No one would have guessed that this would be the boss of a large criminal group. I saw him chuckle a few times, stood up and looked at the dark sea outside the window, and said, "Because of All Might, Neon has been quiet for decades. You should understand that in these decades how cruel it is to be oppressed by professional heroes and the police." Hearing this, the middle-aged man's face revealed a hint of bitterness at the right time. Indeed, in the past few decades, their crimes have been very sad for a few days. Although it is sad that various underground operations have been cracked down by professional heroes and the police, it is not a big problem. The most important thing is, they have derailed from the international. There are very few large multinational criminal groups in the world who dare to have too in-depth contact with Neon. Those who dare to reach out are all cut off by All Might. They can't get in and they can't get out. But it's different now. All Might has retired, and he's powerless to fight anymore. Namu Donju said this, with uncontrollable excitement on his face and an extremely ferocious expression. The mountain that was pressing on our heads was moved. No, it's collapsed. Our day of success has come. After a long time, Namu Donju calmed down, restored his previous harmless appearance, and said softly, "This contact with the international organization Silver Fox is an attempt for us, and it is also an attempt for them. As long as we successfully export these high-end goods this time, we will be back on top of the world, and with the help of the Silver Fox organization, we will become the overlord of the underground." Naeem Donju's voice full of unparalleled self-confidence. The middle-aged man's face was serious. He bowed respectfully and said, "I understand, Mr. Shanzu. There will be absolutely no accidents in this transaction, I guarantee it." Before he could finish speaking, a loud voice suddenly came from outside. Whether it's the middle-aged man or that Namu Donju's complexion instantly became ugly, it's like slapping them in the face. "What's going on outside?" The middle-aged man turned around and yelled in a low voice towards the outside with a stern look on his face. "Don't look at him being so respectful and humble in front of this young man, Namu Donju, but who is he? A vicious high-level villains. This is not something that just anyone can do. It's the unloading area. It seems that someone with no eyes has sneaked in." A voice came from outside the room. Unloading zone. Someone sneaked in. The faces of both of them were startled. They can reach today's status. Apart from their strength, their brains are naturally not stupid. The unloading area, but they are almost at the core area of their port, and they were discovered only after sneaking into the unloading area, which is definitely not something ordinary intruders can do. Could it be that our actions were discovered by professional heroes or the police? The middle-aged man frowned and asked in a deep voice of surprise. Impossible. Namu Donju directly vetoed it, frowning and said in a deep voice, although we have been tracking and preparing for this business for a long time, it was only yesterday that we decided to do it. Even this place was decided temporarily. Those who were snatched, those who were arrested probably haven't found anyone missing in their homes. Professional heroes and the police can't find out so quickly and come to the door. The middle-aged man frowned, and suddenly thought of something. His face turned ugly. Could it be? It's definitely because the team didn't do it quickly, and was followed all the way here by someone's tail. Namu Donju snorted coldly, with an ugly and scary face. Whether it's not doing things quickly or being unclear, or being followed all the way by the tail, that one is definitely a big mistake, not to mention, it's a time like today. 3 minutes. Namu Donju shouted in a deep voice towards the outside, bring that guy to see me within 3 minutes. It won't take 3 minutes. A hoarse voice sounded. Namu Donju was taken aback. His subordinates outside definitely did not have such a voice. Come down here. The brains of Namu Donju and the middle-aged man beside him were spinning quickly, and they understood instantly, and their faces were extremely ugly and scary. Boom! With a loud bang, the door was kicked open, and it fell heavily in front of the two of them. Li Tian, whose whole body was wrapped in ferocious Savitar armor, appeared in front of the two of them. The faces of the two of them became serious, staring at the figure in hideous armor shining with a strange blue light in front of them. Who are you? Namu Donju snorted. The person who killed you. Although Li Tian was a little surprised that this gentle and harmless person seemed to be the leader, he didn't hesitate at all in the movements of his hands, walking towards the two of them with dull but not slow steps. Those heavy steps were like two heavy hammers, hitting the hearts of the two with a dong dong. Both of them are not stupid, they can even be said to be very smart, so they would think a lot about Li Tian who appeared in front of them. For example, they only heard the movement for only a few minutes, but the other party came to their door in front of them. None of their subordinates came over. They are very clear about the viciousness of their subordinates. So many people, were they defeated so quickly? Namu Donju took a deep breath, and 000 couldn't help but feel the pressure. And the middle-aged man on the side was even more dignified, looking at the Savitar, who was walking over. With a thought, he opened his mouth instantly and activated his quirks. Hurricane, a tornado hurricane visible to the naked eye spat out from the middle-aged man's open mouth, and roared towards Li Tian. This small office, this tornado hurricane reached the end almost instantly, came to Li Tian's body. Hurricane. Li Tian looked at the tornado hurricane sweeping in front of him, without the slightest fear in his eyes. His right hand retreated instantly, densely packed super speed force instantly enveloped the entire arm, stepped forward with his foot, and punched out with his right hand suddenly. At this moment, the speed and power of Li Tian's punches were terrifying, breaking through the sound barrier with ease, and the swift punch directly hit the air. Boom! The fist wind visible to the naked eye whizzed out, directly head-on towards the whistling tornado and hurricane, and rushed through the doctor head-on. In the small space, the moment the two hurricanes collided, the surging air directly blasted the room, and the surrounding walls and the ceiling flew out directly. This office was actually transformed from a container. Although Li Tian's punching speed is terrifying, but the punching wind is more than fast and fierce, but the durability is too far behind. It is not as good as the opponent's quirks who specializes in creating hurricanes. After the initial violent collision, Li Tian's punching wind was directly crushed. The hurricane crashed and scattered. However, Li Tian didn't expect that punch to be effective, and his ability is not foolish to throw punches to make wind. After punching, Li Tian didn't stop his movements, but turned to one side, dodged the position where the hurricane hit, and rushed towards the two while lying down. After crossing the hurricane and approaching, don't wait for the other party to react. Boom, 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 boom. Li Tian didn't show mercy in the slightest. he bombarded the opponent's body one after another with fast punches that were invisible to the naked eye, and he swung out more than a dozen punches in the blink of an eye. Boom! With a muffled sound, the middle-aged man fell to the ground without saying a word. Blood flowed from his mouth. After suffering this series of heavy punches, even if he did not die, he would definitely be a cripple. The middle-aged man let out a muffled snort, blood flowed out of his mouth, and he fell to the ground with extreme unwillingness in his eyes. Unexpectedly his chest still heaved slightly. However, after being entertained by Li Tian's heavy punches, even if he survived in the end and saved his life, he will definitely be a useless person for the rest of his life. Not to mention, in this situation, it is impossible for the other party to hold out until rescue comes. Inside the Savitar armor, Li Tian had no expression on his face, and directly stepped over the dead dog-like figure and walked towards the last remaining person, Nemu Donju. The only remaining Nemu Donju looked at Li Tian, who was almost close at hand, with an incomparably solemn expression. Before, no matter whether it was the middle-aged man lying on the ground or Li Tian, whether it was a confrontation or a fight between them, it started too fast and ended too fast. He didn't even have time to react, otherwise, he would never have been able to. He watched helplessly as the middle-aged man was seriously injured and dying. Li Mudonju looked at Li Tian with a ferocious face. His eyes were filled with anger and tension, as well as a trace of indiscernible fear. Around Naim Donju, 7 or 8 green snake-like vines sprang out from the ground suddenly one after another, attacking Li Tian in an instant. At the same time, a vine as thick as a human rose rapidly from Naim Donju's feet, staring at it and growing away from here. Plant. Li Tian stared slightly at the attacking vines. I don't know if it's because he watched too many Naruto in his previous life, but when Li Tian saw these 7 or 8 vines, he immediately thought of Mu Dun. However, compared to the miraculous power in the Hokage seen in the previous life, these 7 or 8 vines are simply shabby. Laugh. The fingertips of armored gloves made of steel are extremely sharp, and under Li Tian's speed, they are no worse than those famous swords. They are not used on weekdays, but Li Tian doesn't like to scratch people with his claws. The 7 or 8 green vines that struck were directly cut into several sections and fell to the ground. And it was also at this time that Li Tian saw what kind of vines fell on the ground. It was clearly beads that somehow became as soft as vines. Li Tian couldn't help but looked at the vine that was as thick as a person in front of him. Although the branches were lush, but after careful inspection, it turned out that it was also bamboo, a bamboo as thick as a person. Standing on the top of the bamboo head, Nemu Donju quickly moved away from the place just now, and stopped on the top of the stacked containers not far away, with a dignified expression on his face. Because this side is still on the way to carry the goods, just now, the light outside is not bad, and it is precisely because of this that Kuimu's unit price can be regarded as seeing the tragedy around. Of course, there is no need to say more about the women who fell unconscious on the ground. He can even repeat the prescription of the medicine that was given, but, those vicious big men lying around with corpses all over the place, it is Nemu Donju's heart. Li panicked. His subordinates. There were more than 100 people, and none of them survived. They all fell to the ground and fell into a pool of blood. If you look around, you can hardly see a complete figure. This is also the reason why Li Tian was able to completely ignore the middle-aged man who seemed to be dying. Outside, he sees too much. As for the fact that he was still hesitating whether to kill someone before, but now he is so cruel and merciless. Li Tian can only say, with a 3-foot sword in mind, a man should be a murderer. Looking at the bloody scene in front of him, Nemu Donju's face was extremely ugly. This kind of method is absolutely impossible to be a professional heroes and not the police. Are those fools and cowards who only meddle in their own business? Nemu Donju looked at Li Tian with resentment in his eyes. There are more than 100 subordinates, and none of them are the kind of fools who just pretend to be random. It was just scrapped. After the resentment passed, Li Mudonju reacted in an instant. He is not qualified to be angry now, and his own life is not completely out of danger. Li Tian looked at Nemu Donju who was standing not far away. A cold light flashed in his eyes. It was because the other party's quirks recalled the memory and the other party escaped, but this time, Li Tian will not hold back. With a few big steps under his feet, Li Tian quickly galloped towards Nemu Donju. Nemu Donju looked at Li Tian who rushed over. his face turned pale with fright. He hurriedly wanted to use quirks, and opened his mouth to say something. Pity. Although he backed out for a distance, it was still too close. In this short distance of tens of meters, even if Li Tian didn't let go, he would cross over in just a second or two, then bend his legs slightly, soar into the sky, and appear directly in front of Nemu Donju, grab the opponent's shoulders with both hands and squeeze them hard suddenly. Crack, click. There were several successive crisp sounds, and at the same time, accompanied by Naeem Donju's ear-piercing scream, his shoulder was crushed by Li Tian directly. Afterwards, Li Tian repeated the same trick, crushing his legs to pieces and knocking him unconscious. If he is not killed, Li Tian is merciful. But the other party still has the value of being alive. It is absolutely impossible for an organization that can kidnap so many women to have only 100 or 10 people. Behind it, there is definitely a huge network that Li Tian can't imagine, and the password to enter this network is the one he labeled a young man like a dead dog. However, the rest is the job of the police and professional heroes. It's out of his hands and out of his hands. Standing on the top of the container, Li Tian turned around and looked at the tragic situation below, his eyes extremely indifferent. After the 110 villains tonight, not many will survive, and even if they survive, they will be reduced to disabled people. The scene in front of him fully demonstrated that, as a speedster, Li Tian's slaughter efficiency is astonishing after he has made up his mind. You must know, to create the scene in front of him, Li Tian has not yet exerted his full strength. But, after tonight, the identity of Savitar, I'm afraid it will no longer be a dark heroes but a villains. Darkness heroes, although there is the word darkness, but since it bears the word heroes, it also means that the opponent's hands cannot be contaminated with human life. And once it is contaminated with crime, or even human life, there is no doubt that no matter what the reason, will be listed as villains. But, Li Tian won't regret it. Heroes in this world don't kill villains or rarely take the initiative to kill villains. That's because the heroes in this world is just a profession. A profession born during this transitional period. After obtaining official recognition, it is natural to abide by official laws. The law is the rule of this world, and the heroes of this world is to abide by the law and crack down on those who break the law. However, this is not the heroes in Li Tian's mind. Quote, after all, Li Tian is not just an ordinary boy in his teens. The combined age of his previous life and present life is a full 40 years old. Although this is not the calculation, Li Tian can barely be regarded as 30 or even 40 years old. Don't be confused. He knows what he's doing, and he knows what he's doing. 2 words, not regret. Standing on the top of this bloody battlefield, Li Tian didn't think wildly, but quietly looked at the sea, showing no intention of leaving here. Where there are sellers, there will naturally be buyers. Now the seller is disabled by Li Tian, but the buyer who hasn't arrived yet doesn't know where it is. If Li Tian leaves at this time, the last one to pick up the bargain might be the buyer. So, Li Tian has to wait. Regardless of whether the police and professional heroes who were notified before arrived first, or the so-called buyer arrived first, Li Tian would leave after this. About 6 or 7 minutes passed. Li Tian, who was standing on a high place, suddenly looked into the distance with concentration. Although it was in a dark shadow and the moonlight was not bright, one could vaguely see a huge monster slowly approaching in the distance. It was a freighter. A freighter is a buyer, or simply is a express. Sang Tian-kun, can today's transaction really go smoothly? I have a bad feeling. A blonde white man with a strange accent looked at the faintly visible thing in the distance. Kishibe frowned and said, of course, Mr. Paul, don't worry, in Neon, our Kawaguchi group is still very powerful, and everything has been prepared long ago. The nearby police and professional heroes have long been dispatched, and this operation, they are all the elites of our organization. Needless to say, those standing beside the white man are naturally the villains' organization on Neon's side, that is, people sent by the so-called Kawaguchi Gumi. But, Captain Paul was about to speak, when suddenly another foreign man stepped forward and whispered in Captain Paul's ear. What? Captain Paul's expression changed instantly, and then he immediately shouted, turn the bow, return, return. Return at full speed. Captain Paul, you. The face of the so-called Kawaguchi Gumi man changed slightly and he was about to speak. Throw this guy down to feed the fish. Captain Paul left in a hurry after leaving a word. And the face of the man from the Kawaguchi group changed, his hands instantly turned into rocks, and he was alert to the several strong white men who surrounded him. Mr. Paul, what happened to Mr. Paul? We have a good Shangjong. Looking at the looming freighter approaching in the distance, Li Tian couldn't help turning his head to look to the other side. In the distance, red and blue lights flickered wildly, and the piercing siren gradually came over. Are the police here too? Li Tian frowned involuntarily. This speed is not slow, but it is definitely not fast. He had notified the police before sneaking in here. He just said that there was a major human trafficking case involving hundreds of people. He thought that the police would come over faster, but he didn't expect to come here at this time. It's better to come early than to come at a good time. At first, I thought we had to kill again. Li Tian looked at the freighter that was gradually receding in the distance, hesitated a little, but still didn't follow Qi. Although the police were still some distance away, Li Tian could vaguely see that a lot of heroes outside were about to arrive, or had already arrived. The freighter had already arrived here. Li Tian didn't believe that the other party could escape. Succeed and retire. Li Tian stretched his waist, and closed the gap that exuded the conspicuous blue light on his body, and instantly changed from a human-shaped lighthouse to an ordinary armored man. Below, those villains don't know what drugs or quirks were used for these women. At this time, these people are still unconscious. With a leap, Li Tian jumped directly into the path between the containers. Without the blockade of the villains, in a place like the pier, it couldn't be easier to leave quietly. By the way, when I saw the bay before, I thought of diving in from the waterway, but isn't it easier to come to the pier connected here? Li Tian, is that guy gone? In the dark room, there was a thin female voice. There has been no movement for a while, let's take a look. Another female voice sounded in the dark room. But the first female voice seemed to want to say something, but was stopped directly. Protecting the people is the duty of heroes. Click. Accompanied by a not-so-small sound, a faint ray of light shone into the room. In the darkness, the not-so-simple layout of the room could be vaguely seen. The figures of 7 or 8 women were curled up in the corner, and the faint light shone on everyone's faces. Every face was full of panic, fear, but even tears flowed down my face, but the faces were still beautiful. Only the faces of the 2 beautiful figures not far away from the light showed no trace of fear, only caution. These 2 people were the North American shorthair cat and ragdoll cat who were arrested before. And this is not a dark house, but a beautifully arranged container, or a container that might have been their new home for a while. The 2 doors of the container, North American shorthair cats and ragdoll cats cautiously peeked out from the gap. Outside, the figures on the ground were staggering here and there, the ground was stained red with blood. Fortunately, the women who were captured were only in a coma due to drugs, but the villains of the criminal gangs were seriously injured and fell down one by one. In a pool of blood. There are even many who can no longer see the ups and downs of their chests, obviously, they are already dead. No wonder. From the very beginning of the battle, although Li Tian didn't intend to kill those people intentionally, he still kept his hand in the slightest. The rapid mode -10 times the speed is fully activated, and although there is no special increase or ability with the Savitar armor, but at any rate, it was also made of steel, and with that rapid fist, every punch and every blow was strong and powerful, and the lethality was astonishingly great. The terrifying scene in front of them chilled the hearts of both the North American shorthair and the ragdoll. However, the 2 were not surprised by this scene. In the containers they were in, including North American shorthair cats and ragdoll cats, each was a woman who was captured in Kyoto. Unlike goods from other regions, among the villains in Kyoto, one of the villains has quirks for drowsiness, so they are all stunned by quirks, not drugs. As for quirks, the person who used quirks, if they are all dead, the quirks imposed on them will naturally disappear, and they will wake up. At that time, the noisy sound outside made the 2 women who had just woken up from a coma feel a little dazed, and then looked up. Hiss, the 2 girls gasped in fright at the time, adding bricks and tiles to global warming. It was a naked massacre. A figure like the evil ghost Shira, whose whole body is wrapped in ferocious armor. Every second you can see villains being blown out and spitting blood. Every punch will definitely have villains fall down. In just a few tens of seconds, most of the seemingly dark villains have been removed. And those villains who are so vicious as if they are not afraid of death, are afraid. Are afraid. There were even a few villains who looked extremely ferocious and slumped on the ground, staring blankly at the ferocious man with fear in their eyes. But more villains rushed up with a look of horror. The pressure of fear and death made those villains lose their minds, and the fierceness in their hearts was so fierce that they rushed forward desperately. But no use. A group of villains who have lost their minds are just a group of wild beasts. Compared with the beginning, the slaughter efficiency is even faster, and the villains who were knocked down one by one and fell to the ground with serious injuries showing a look of finally being relieved. This violent scene made the two women who are senior professional heroes sweat coldly, and the fear in their hearts is definitely not weaker than those of the villains who were shocked, because the person who shot was not anyone they knew. Occupation heroes. And no class heroes has ever shot so brutally. Using the puppet cat's search for quirks, they can see clearly the injuries suffered by the villains who were knocked down one by one. They are either broken tendons or fractures or severe internal organs. If they are not treated in time, the injuries inside at least half of the people will die, and the other half will be left with injuries that are difficult to heal. The North American shorthair cat and the ragdoll cat made a judgment in an instant. It is their duty as heroes to save the people, but no one said that they would save the villains together. The two women looked at each other with one glance. They immediately closed the door of the container that had been opened by them, and then took 2 steps back nervously and vigilantly. Behind them, there are still 7 or 8 people. Taking a deep breath, the North American shorthair cat bravely protected the puppet cat and walked out of the container. There are villains who do not know whether they are alive or dead, and there are even quite a few figures of quirks, the ragdoll cats, who are obviously dead. The sound of the police whistle came to their ears, which shocked the hearts of the two women, and then their faces showed joy. Before they start calling, or want to rush towards the direction of the siren, a few figures swished out. This is Osaka's real job heroes. When the police received Li Tian's call, they naturally also received the commission from the police. Even because of the free use of quirks, they arrived here faster than the police drove. But the bloody scene with corpses all over the ground, even the professional heroes were extremely astonished. "Don't move." Facing the only 2 people standing, professional heroes yelled again in an instant. "We are not villains." The North American shorthair immediately raised his hand, indicating that he did not mean to attack, and then shouted, "We are members of the heroes group." Cat, North American shorthair and puppet. The cat was caught by a criminal group. The same is true for the puppet cats on the side, but the professional heroes on the side still took the 2 of them down and released the 2 women after checking and confirming, but they still looked vigilant. North American shorthair cats and ragdoll cats also understand very well. Although they are professional heroes, it is normal for them to appear in this kind of place and be suspected. The 2 women stepped forward and quickly recounted the matter from beginning to end. Although it was not specific, the general situation was indeed clear to the professional heroes present, and the faces of each of them suddenly became incomparably gloomy and ugly. A large-scale criminal group involved in trafficking in women in many places, an unknown number of arrested girls, unknown thugs who massacred villains, and dozens of villains whose life and death are unknown. It's definitely not what they want to see in their own jurisdiction. Especially the scene in front of them gave them an incomparable headache. Even if these were all villains, this was too much. This was their first time here, and they didn't check carefully. Otherwise, if they knew that there were more than 1,000 abducted women here, they would be even more worried. The ship over there. Suddenly, a professional heroes pointed to the cargo ship that was leaving the post in the dark bay in the distance and shouted. "What happened to the boat?" Someone frowned and glanced at the professional heroes. Osaka port is open 24 hours a day, and it is normal for cargo ships to come and go. When we came just now, the boat was sailing towards the shore, but now it's going in the opposite direction without landing. The man quickly explained, but his brows furrowed immediately. Although the port where they are now is close to the harbor, the cargo ship of the other party is still at least 4 or 5 miles away from the shore, and there is nothing he can do if he wants to cross this section of the sea. Didn't dock. A freighter leaving in the opposite direction. This time, one of the people present understood what this person meant. This is the port, and the other party chose the port to carry out the transaction, so the means of transaction is naturally the most convenient ship. It's the buyer for this deal. No, they want to run. In an instant, there were a few professional heroes whose faces changed drastically, and after they wanted to rush over. These are sure to catch up. Don't worry. A middle-aged professional heroes who looked relatively calm raised his hand to stop those people. Obviously, he is more prestigious among this group of people. Those who want to catch up professional heroes also stopped. Go and notify the police first. Let the police prepare to intercept the other party's ship, and notify other professional heroes to help. Follow up and don't get too close to scare the enemy, as long as you don't lose the other party is enough. Hehe. Entered our Osaka Bay still wants to escape, dreaming. The middle-aged professional heroes snorted coldly before turning around. Let's clean up the situation here first. Rescuing those abducted women is our first task, and carefully check the villains if anyone survived, notify the police and send them to the hospital as soon as possible. I'm here to help. My quirks are searchers, and they're good at this kind of rescue operation. The puppet cat stepped forward quickly. The middle-aged professional heroes frowned, but he didn't say anything in the end. Although the other party still had certain suspicions, he was still a professional heroes after all, and Cat was also a group of senior professional heroes. The other side. After the police received the notification from the frontline professional heroes, Lee called the responsible department in Osaka Bay and asked them to quickly prepare ships to stop the cargo ship that was about to escape, and at the same time called to find more professional heroes' office is ready to go to support. Another thing is to notify the hospital. Although they have notified the congressman to send an ambulance before the action, the situation on the scene is much worse than they imagined, so more ambulances need to be sent to support. Some distance away from Osaka Bay, Savita looked at the corner of Osaka Bay surrounded by police cars and ambulances, as well as the fleeing freighter in the distance, stared deeply before turn around and leave. He doesn't think that he is omnipotent because of his strength. In this chaotic era, no matter whether it is a professional heroes firm or the police, there are not many fish in troubled waters. For one, Li Tian has a lot to learn. Savitar, this vest. May have to stop temporarily to avoid the limelight. Li Tian looked at his handsome Savitar armor with a look of pity. Up to now, he has not even found a chance to publicize the name of his vest, which is Savitar, and as a result, such a thing happened. The vest of Savitar may be regarded as the villains are wanted. What a spoiler. It seems that I underestimated the chaos of this era. Li Tian couldn't help but feel helpless, living in the world of his previous life. He couldn't even imagine what kind of concept it is that the crime rate in the world is 20% higher, except for the occasional few villains in the city on weekdays, it is quite normal. As for saying sorry, regret is not regret. Li Tian won't regret dealing with a bunch of scum. The only thing wrong with the Savitar vest is not that it hit the villains too hard, but that it did not have the right to enforce the law and kill the villains, otherwise, the Savitar vest would not have reduced to become villains. As for the aftermath of the sage, that is, nausea and vomiting and so on. Apart from a little discomfort, Li Tian didn't feel any other special feeling. After all, he is no longer the ordinary young man who has never killed a chicken in his previous life. In this world, let alone the firm will to exercise and hone by turning on the speed force, phew. From the beginning to the end, what he did was not much different from the previous few days of fighting, but, when he attacked, he didn't control his Rikido and the position of the blow as well as before, and it's not that he was cruelly killing the villain on purpose. And the like, how could there be such sequelae? At most, there is a sense of guilt after a murder. But that kind of thing is not worth mentioning at all compared to the hatred and killing intent that was burning in anger just now. Early the next morning, Li Tian woke up from his own bed, and after stretching, he simply got up from the bed. It was as if last night's actions didn't bother him in the slightest. I don't know if it's the fault of Speed Force, but now Li Tian only needs to talk for 4 or 5 hours a day to regain his full energy, instead of sleeping for 7 or 8 hours. Walking out of the room, Li Tian casually brushed his teeth and washed his face. At home, he is the only one. After All Might retired, the 2 women in the family got busy. First, Yu Shanyu often does not go home during the day and night to carry out heroes' activities, and Nanli Wei does not know what task Nanli Wei has received. Before Li Tian went to have a workplace experience, the other party was called away. It's almost dry and I haven't come back. Moreover, according to my aunt, it is not impossible for Sister Yi's mission to last for several months, or even half a year. Cuckoo. Spit out the mouthwash in his mouth. Li Tian looked at the handsome young man with an energetic face in the mirror and couldn't help but exclaimed, still so hot and handsome. Asterisk. In the 34th breakfast shop, Li Tian was scrolling through the news on his mobile phone while eating the breakfast in front of him leisurely. It's really strange that such a big news last night was not reported. Li Tian looked at the series of news and scratched his head strangely. How did he know that for the police and professional heroes, if the incident of last night could not be publicized, they would try not to publicize it as much as possible? In addition, the incident happened suddenly and it was approaching night. Although the reporter and the media we know that the Osaka police had a major event last night, but we don't know the details at all. If you want to report it, you may have to wait a few days for the police announcement. However, although he didn't see the villain's news about those individual traffickers, Li Tian found a related news, that is. At about 0:30 in the morning of Yiling yesterday, my Osaka police intercepted an overseas smuggling boat in Osaka Bay. The source of the smuggling boat has not been identified yet, but it is suspected of being an international smuggling villains organization. Here, Ifang seriously warns the international villains organizations that our country. Li Tian completely ignored the following series of official words, and directly scrolled to the bottom to read the comments. Overseas smuggling ship. There is also an international villas organization involved. Are these international villas organizations going to intervene in Neon? The Osaka police did a great job. All Might, we need you. Cut. There are no comments on sand sculptures, bad reviews. Li Tian turned off his phone and concentrated on eating breakfast. Thanks to the recent incidents, his aunt's salary and bonus have increased a lot, so Li Tian has a lot more money recently. More importantly, Li Tian's first manga is finally published. And the manga that Li Tian chose to test the waters is One Punch Man, which is very different but has the same heroes as My English World. Although the first few chapters of the manga have only been published, the response is quite good. According to the editor's reply, it is not to say that it is very popular, but at least Li Tian's own meal money can be afforded after the publishing fee from 1/5. Sighing, Li Tian decided not to think about these sad things anymore. After clearing the breakfast on the table, he checked out and left the breakfast shop to go to the heroic campus to start his new daily campus life. At the same time, in a certain city, it's really interesting. A sloppy middle-aged man looked at the information searched in the computer, with a strange smile on his face. I didn't expect that. I haven't planned to do anything here yet, and you can't wait to want it. Join the camp of villains. Sure enough, I'm not mistaken, you should be villains. Come on, haha. The sloppy middle-aged man let out a weird laugh. The information displayed on the computer screen in front of him is a detailed report of the incident that happened in Osaka port last night. Although this information cannot be called top secret, it is definitely not information that can be found casually. At least none of the media with great powers has obtained this information. And the fact is exactly the same. He found this report in the police database, and it took him a lot of effort. Looking at the portrait of Savitar, with the watermark of the police on the computer screen, which he will never forget, the sloppy middle-aged, no, it should be said that he smiled brightly on his face. Especially the big word, villains, and the wanted order, made him very happy. This game is finally starting, Dark Heroes Villains. I don't know what will happen next. Sol said. His tongue unconsciously licked the corner of his mouth. There was no concealment of anticipation on his face. Osaka Metropolitan Police Department. Ryoko, Tomoko, are you all right? The Mandalay cat of the Heroes Group cat looked at the North American shorthair cats and ragdoll cats in the hall with a look of joy on their faces, and rushed over quickly. Behind her, the tiger who followed was also full of excitement. We're fine. The North American shorthair and ragdoll looked at the rushing Mandalay cat and the tiger, showing big smiles. They have been in the professional hero industry for more than 10 years, and they have never experienced any big storms. Although the scene last night was a bit bigger and bloodier, it would not allow these two senior professional heroes to appear psychological shadow. After the four communicated for a while, Tiger looked at the two and asked in a deep voice, "What happened last night? Why are you here at the Osaka Metropolitan Police Department?" According to the information left by the two, they almost turned Kyoto upside down with the Kyoto police and professional models last night. It's a long story. The North American Shorthair and Ragdoll looked at each other and couldn't help but smile wryly. When they knew that they were in Osaka port, they were also very confused. They were in Kyoto before they fainted, and when they woke up, apart from the exciting scene, even came to Osaka. Then you guys will make a long story short, said the Mandalay cat, pinching its waist and shrugging its nose. To make a long story short, the group of human traffickers who captured us took us all the way to Osaka. The Ragdoll shrugged and said jokingly. The faces of the Mandalay cat and the tiger turned black. Who didn't know this? It wasn't the group of human traffickers villains who brought you here, maybe it was you who brought the human traffickers here. Cough cough. The North American Shorthair cat coughed twice, and then quickly said some things they knew in a soft voice. A huge human trafficking case involving thousands of people. Both the Mandalay cat and the tiger stared round. This is a really big case, and it is a big case that is rare in 10 years. It's a pity. The reason why their heroes group cat participated in this case was not because they helped, but because they became victims. Shame on Jill. The tiger stared at the sky speechlessly. What can he do? As the only man with Jill in the heroes group cat, this kind of thing is nothing to worry about. I hope everyone will support it and subscribe more.